Welcome to GrabCON 2021 by the Cyber Grabs. My name is Mudit Bansal and I would be your host for the event. The Cyber Grabs is a security and researching community where we endeavor to teach everyone willing to learn something new. If you are interested in pen testing, cybersecurity, CTFs, programming, development, etc., or simply looking for a place to collaborate with like-minded people, we are the place. We are an emerging community and we welcome everyone as a place of education and growth. This conference would not be possible without our sponsors, so here is a word from our sponsors. I would also like to extend the thanks to our community partners Dark Army, Hackers Arcade, cscodershub, Vulnfreak, and Noob Army. Without them, this conference would not have been possible. Thank you guys for your support. Let me give you my introduction. My name is Mudit Bansal, aka Default. You would find me on the Discord server. GrabCON 2021 is a 4-day event wherein the first 2 days we have this amazing conference with a great lineup of speakers and some giveaways. Also, the next 2 days we have a 48-hour CTF which again is loaded with prizes. So, for the entire journey, you could connect with us on our Discord. The link is in the bio. You could find me there as well. Now, I would like to introduce to you Vandana Verma ma'am, who would be speaking about continuous security, building security into your pipelines. I hope you all learned something here. Over to you, ma'am.
Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining. Today we are going to talk about continuous security, building your pipeline. Let me go ahead and start sharing and we can get started with the presentation. All right. So the topic of the presentation is continuous security, building security into your pipeline. About me, I'm a security advocate or security relations leader at Sneak. Apart from that, I do root for pro bono work, and I'm one of the global board of directors at OWASP, currently serving as a vice chair. I'm also a local leader for Bangalore and leading a couple of projects and a few other things with OWASP. I'm also on the review board of Black Hat Asia, taking care of Grace Hopper India, B-Sides Conference in India, and supporting Global AppSec Conference. Let's get started. When we talk about DevSecOps or DevOps, there's always a blame game that goes on, and which we've seen from so many years. Like when I started, it was all about a waterfall model wherein we used to come as a security person in the end. But then there was a challenge. If there is a critical bug or a high severity bug that used to come in, there used to be always a trouble, like whether to let go the application on the internet to the production or not. There was a challenge. Then came DevOps, wherein Dev and Ops came together. They realized that earlier the releases used to be 6 months, 1 year, but now that is not going to be the case. The releases have to be quite quick and agile. But when we talk about organizations, there are organizations which are doing multiple releases in a day, which is like with a lightning speed. Now, when we have that, how do we fit security into it? And if there is a security bug that comes into picture, or if there is a breach that comes into limelight, who is going to be held responsible for it? That's the challenge. Now, if we keep this blame game, there will be a lot of issues that will be in the picture. Now, when we talk about security, this is what security team thinks, that we're just cleaning the mess that is coming out of DevOps, but that is not the case. I feel this is how it should be, where DevOps and security are working together to make sure that the end goal, which is the organization has the best of applications with the security and everything is running smooth. That's the goal. And when we talk about DevSecOps, visibility is one important aspect of it, which gives us observability, traceability, confidence, and compliance in our applications and the way we work with our organizations. And DevSecOps or DevOps is not just that we're going to be fitting something into at one place, but it has to be continuously building into the whole process, starting with the ideation phase when we are thinking of, okay, this is what we need, to going through the code phase wherein we are building the secure code and moving on to a point wherein we are actually taking care of all the features, anything which is coming from the previous releases, to deploying, to managing, to having this whole progression cycle. Now, uh, from the whole phase, we talk about specifically for our general cycle, like static analysis to unit test to integration test to acceptance test. But think about how security gets into it and how fast do we get the feedback. So what we need is we need a process which is continuous, wherein we are enabling our developers and the operations team to everyone who's involved in the whole process, starting with the architects to the people who are project managers, anyone who is helping with the scrum meetings, all of them have to be embedded very closely. And not just that, at the same time, we are enabling security team to understand what is there in the infrastructure, because till the time we don't know our own assets, till the time we don't know our own applications, we will always be going into the loop, but not the security loop, not wherein we are managing our application life cycle properly, but in a loop wherein we'll keep finding, oh, who did what? Who was the culprit? Where did we find the issue? How should we fix it? And we will see that there'll be a lot of things that will be left behind, and we would not be able to meet the end goal. So we need to stop for a review, get the security approval, and not just security approval, like we all have to work together and make sure that we first check the security standpoint. Now, think about when we are using this whole pipeline, which we call it as DevOps pipeline or DevSecOps pipeline. If we use the tools from a security standpoint, the tools which developers use, which the operation team use, it becomes even more easy. For code, there are tools which are available for um for the development of application, like IDEs tools. There's Visual Studio is there, Eclipse is there. How about we start using those tools and leverage it to build our own pipeline, and build the security into the pipeline when it comes to Git? How about having something which can be seamlessly integrated with Git, with Maven, with other platforms that the developers use or the testers use? Going into the CI/CD testing monitoring, there are so many open source components which are there, which we can leverage, and we can then deploy it into the production. Now we're talking about all the cloud native applications and whatnot. So we need to consider the cloud at the same speed, same consistency. So for coding, we have so many open source components which we can leverage, for source code, for source control, for CI/CD, for container and serverless, for platform as a service, registries. There's so much available. Now, when we are talking about DevSecOps or setting up something properly into the pipeline, it is not that we are going to only have to buy these tools. No, there are so many open source tools which are available. I have created a talk which says that how to run an AppSec pipeline or DevSecOps pipeline using the open source tools, specifically using the OWASP tools that are there. There are n number of wonderful OWASP projects which are there, which we can leverage. And if we don't set up our own pipeline right, or DevSecOps pipeline right, what will happen? These supply chain attacks, they're a massive risk. Especially, we saw that last year was very, very, very tricky, wherein we saw the supply chain attacks to be on the rise. And even this year has not left behind. There are cases of these supply chain attacks which are there. And people say that now we know about it, but are we going to just skip by saying that? No, these attacks are going to be there. When we talk about the open source code base, there is 80 to 90% of the code on the internet, and the applications that we are using is open source. How much code base are we developing ourselves? 10 to 20% max, I'm saying. That's what the stats says. That's what the research says. And if any of the code, any part of the code, any library, third-party component, or even the platform that we're using that is vulnerable, aren't we going to see that application is vulnerable, which we have? Absolutely. And same time, when we are talking about the greatest technologies, talking about microservices, containers, Kubernetes, all of this. So, do we have the responsibility to make sure that these services that when we are using, they are built, deployed, and scaled with the same speed when we are trying to integrate security into it? And another component, infrastructure as a code, which is picking up big time. We're talking about YAML scripts, we're talking about Terraforms and whatnot. When we are talking about Terraforms and these newer technologies which are helping us to bring our security or bring our network early. So that becomes important that we embed security to it. We audit them, we make sure that any flaw that is there in the code base itself, we fix it before we even just push it to the production or when we just spin our own environment. Now, what happens if we don't do it? If we don't look at it properly, the breaches like this will happen, wherein we might not even get to know that where exactly thing happened, where exactly we went wrong, or how soon we need to respond to it. Now, if you talk about people, uh, they are trying to cascade this information that there is something which has happened, but sometimes the impact is so huge that we don't get to know that where the exploit happened, what we were using, how we were using. So that's a or massive challenge which is there. And what can help us in that? Chaos engineering. Now, what is chaos engineering? Chaos engineering is something where we're trying to test the application early, test the environment early in the pipeline so that there are issues that we can avoid. Now, these issues can actually help us in getting resolved by making sure that we have a right incident response process, we have the controlled validation in process, and we are observing all of that which is happening early in the pipeline. Not just that, compliance monitoring is not just a checklist, it is a kind of a process that we need to follow to make sure our own environment is secure. Now think about GDPR or any other privacy protection laws that we have. If we don't follow, what will happen? We will have huge fines. Now, why this has come into picture? If we don't use these compliances as just a checklist, and understand that these are important things, which means it will help us in bringing security in a much more responsible way. And when we talk about compliance monitoring, there is another beautiful tool like Monkey, which came in 2011 by Netflix. I think they nailed the point that they need chaos engineering, not just from a perspective wherein it just need in the DevOps space, but in the security space as well. And when we talk about DevOps, it's about people, process, and technology together with the right culture. And if we have best of people, best of process, best of technology, but we don't have the right culture in an organization, it is never going to succeed. We need to involve the teams to our own discussions that we have with security teams, with CISOs, with CTOs, and whatnot. Like there are so many vulnerabilities that keep coming in. There are so many 0 days that keep coming in, but who talks about it? With whom all we share all these information? And especially if I talk about departments, how many departments that we interact with, and if we don't share this information, we will be in trouble. Let me tell you one important aspect. So when I started my career, especially around DevSecOps or DevOps, there was one time wherein there was a major release and there was a scrum call wherein we were invited, but then the scrum call happened early, half an hour early. When we went to the room, there was no one. What was the room? They didn't have a trust on the security team that this will be a smooth release. But over the course of action, we started working together. And uh, after 6 months, I remember there was another release wherein which was also a major release, and they asked us that what are the challenges that could be there, how exactly we can try and fix it, what are the issues that can be there. Then this actually a discussion and all those trust building activities helped us big time. Another important aspect was that there was one critical bug that we found in an application which was lower down to medium, but then due to certain updates, that bug actually portrayed as a critical bug. Now, this was not detected by us, but the development team, which realized that this could be a huge concern for their application. And if we embrace the automation, it is only going to help us. It is only going to help us in succeeding in the journey that we have, which is called DevSecOps journey. And the only thing that can nurture it to a bigger scale is the security champion. Most of the organizations that I've seen that they've started understanding that we need security champion, and it's not just one person show. It has to be with all the teams working together in a synchrony wherein we are cross-skilling each other, we are empowering each other, we are securing each other instead of blocking it. Like we remember saying no for a go live in the past, but now I understand that how important it is to manage the production environment, a feature, and at the same time making sure that there is a secure environment with the proper buy-in from everyone. And it has to be everyone's process. It has to be part of the everyday's process wherein we are changing the mindset. We are not just saying that, okay, this is what it is and you have to follow. No, this is not going to happen. And that's when the ownership and the goal or the ownership change comes into picture, when we are talking about top to bottom or bottom to top approach. Leadership is very clear in what they're trying to cascade into the team, and the team is sharing and informing the leadership in their own language, and that's how it becomes a team sport. It's not just that, oh, development team, security team, and operation team, all of those are teams are working individual and they're talking about it. But let me show you something before we actually talk about these key takeaways. So here, this is an environment that I have set up around Azure pipeline. Now, when I talk about Azure pipeline, I wanted to show you that this is how Azure DevOps looks like. Um, this is how Azure DevOps looks. This is how Azure DevOps looked like. So I just went to Azure DevOps portal. I created an organization, and some of you might already be using it. So within my organization, I have a project that I have created. Now in the project, there are certain things that I can look for. And here I have boards where I can see all the activities that are happening. I can see sprints. I can see if there are any queries. So right now I've not created any sprint, but then there are backlogs which are there. Now, if I talk about repos are the ones that are there, which I've pulled from my GitHub. I can pull it up from any other place as well. I can create my own build. I can clone the repository. And here I have set up my pipelines. Now, if I have to show you, there are certain pipelines which are failed, which I failed intentionally. If you see, this was working and this got failed. Now, if I go back, these are the three pipelines which are working totally fine. Now, you must be thinking that you're new to it, how to set up a new pipeline. I'll just go ahead and set up a new pipeline here. Now, here my code is into the GitHub. I'm going to go ahead and click on GitHub. So I've set up my own GitHub, and I have it integrated into my DevOps pipeline, which is there on Azure. So I can go ahead and click on maybe Java pipeline, Java Goof, and this is the code which is there. It can be anything. And now, okay. Okay. So here, I can allow the access for it, like only one repository. I'll just go ahead and approve and install. And what it will do is it'll just go ahead and start taking my details. It'll start working towards setting up my Azure DevOps organization, and I can go ahead and start using it. So here I can figure out what exactly it is. Do I need to start a pipeline? What do I need to? I'll say I'll start a pipeline. There's a YAML script which is there. You can read it. What is the trigger? It's a master process. So want to latest. What do I really want? And I can go ahead and save and run. I can go ahead and save and run, and it'll start running. If everything goes smooth, it'll set up a pipeline for me. And if there are any concerns, it'll flag it. But now where comes the security? That's the major portion here. So now while it's running, I'm going to go ahead and go to my pipelines and show one of the pipeline which is there, which is, let's say, Pixie. Now Pixie, I'll go ahead and add it. I'll click here, and I can show you that I can edit my pipeline here. Now, when I added my pipeline, here is the code which is written. So here I have master, I have imported a mode security core rule set. and Pixie with it. And if I talk about mode security, basically we can say that it's a web application firewall with a core rule set. And here I have configured all of these things, how exactly it's going to go, what exactly it's going to do. It's going to run a Docker container, Apache on it. And if, let's say, I want another security tool like dependency check. So what I can do is I can go ahead and put dependency check. I can type the path name saying that it's a Latam, saying that it's a demo. It's a demo. It's a demo. Defining the path, XYZ. Excluding the path, it can be CSV or it can be something else. Now I go ahead and add it. So here, things will be added as part of the whole process. If you see this, if I want here, I can add it. If I want it like in the end, I can put it here and I can go ahead and save it. And just save it and it'll start running. Similarly, we can add multiple other tools which are there. Let's say Zap. Zap is there. So we can go ahead and start using Zap. So building a pipeline, it's easy. It is not difficult. It's just that we need to understand what tools we need to add where. And we need to make sure that we prepare our umbrella before it even rains. So we understand, are we using cloud, Azure, AWS, IBM Cloud, or any other cloud? And what kind of services they are providing? Are there any open source components? Are there any commercial tools that we already have? Can we leverage the same license there? And how are we going to enable our own teams for it? Because it's not a one person show. Everyone has to be involved. And we might need to create a parallel pipeline to make sure that we have in-depth pen testing. Another important aspect is that there are risks that we would need to accept, but we need to define when are we going to fix all of this. Because in the pipeline, I've seen that people say that we don't want to fail the pipeline. And that's what I'm in support of, because we need to understand our own maturity model. And if we don't have the right maturity model and we say that we're going to fail every build, we're never going to have the right results for it. So first, let's start fresh. We're not failing the build. We understand this is where we stand. And then go ahead and start talking about, okay, here we stand. These are the things that we can modify. These are the things that we can change. So understanding the security posture is very, very important. And there are so many articles around DevSecOps, DevOps, what we can read. And you can reach me anytime on my Twitter handle, infosec Vandana, and LinkedIn as well. Now, this was a very short presentation because we just have like 30 minutes for it. But what we can do is we can connect back on my LinkedIn profile, my Twitter, anytime. I'll be more than happy to have a chat with you. Thank you so much.
Now I would like to introduce you to Mr. Anugrah sir, who would be telling us about playing with password reset functionality. Over to you, sir.
Hi everyone, today I will be presenting my talk on playing with password reset functionalities. In this talk, we will explore some common vulnerabilities in password reset functionality. Before we begin, let me introduce myself. Who am I? My name is Anugrah sir. I am a cybersecurity analyst at UST. I am a passive bug bounty hunter and a Synac red team member. You can connect with me through my social media handles I have provided here. I have recently launched my blog named p1boom.com, where I have started sharing my journey into cybersecurity coming from a non-technical background and some interesting findings and tutorials, etc. Do check that out. Coming to the talk, when you are looking for vulnerabilities, you can either look for specific class of bugs like XSS, SQLI, SSRF, etc. Or you can look at functionality wise. What I mean by functionality wise, you can look at functionalities like file upload functionality, where you upload files and you can find multiple bugs there, and you look at sign in functionality, or you can look at multiple factor authentication functionalities. One of the functionality which I personally love to explore more was forgot password, because most of the website in the modern era had this forgot password functionality, because most of the web application had authentication and the user tends to forget his password, and there needed a mechanism which helped him or her to regain his access to his account by changing his password. Going further, you might be thinking, what could go wrong here, right? It's a simple functionality. We have used forgot password functionality before. It's simple. You click on a forgot password link, you enter your email address or username, you get an URL in your email address, you just click on that, you will be taken to a website where you ask to input your new password, and your account is password is resetted and you are able to access your account again. Simple, right? And what can go wrong here? Let's see. Me and my friend Mal was hunting on a particular program, and we came across this password reset functionality, and we requested for the password reset a token. An OTP was sent to our email address. For a surprising reason, we found the same token in the email and in the website itself, which was sitting just above the enter OTP field. So it was a direct P1 and an account takeover. What could have gone wrong here? That poor developer might have forgot to disable his debug codes, which is used in the developer site to when he moved to production site. Maybe you never know, right? So we have seen like what could a problem in password reset functionality could lead. We have seen an account takeover just now. So a misconfiguration or problem in your password reset is there. What can it lead to? One immediate impact would be full account takeover. Then there can be other vulnerabilities, accesses, token leakage, parameter pollution, and all those kind of things can happen. So we will learn more about this and dig deep more on all these vulnerabilities in upcoming slides. The first one is password reset poisoning, which lead to account takeover. If you have a target website and you identified host header attack, what I mean by host header attack, in a host header attack, the website handles the value of the host header in an unsafe manner, and in some cases the bug bounty program or the website you are hunting does not be having the host header attack in scope, or in a pentest you want to escalate this. You can find the forgot password endpoint of that particular website and do password reset poisoning. Let's see what happens here. For a request here, you can see the host is example.com. I'm, as an attacker, change this host header to evilhost.com. Let's see how the web application handle this value of host header in an unsafe manner. So when the password reset URL was crafted, the web application took the value of host header and put it in the URL. So as you can see, the password reset URL which the victim got have evilhost.com. So once the victim click on this particular password reset URL, the password reset token will be sent to the attacker control server. You can use ngrok or Burp Collaborator for the same, and this could lead to an account takeover. Here are some examples how you can achieve password reset poisoning. You can use an additional host header. You can use an header X forward host header. You can use other multiple ways to achieve host header attacks in a password reset endpoint and poison. There is a beautiful lab by Pentester Academy where they teach you password reset poisoning and where you can test out and learn more about this. I suggest you check that out. Next one is account takeover through parameter manipulation. What I mean by parameter manipulation here, we manipulate the parameter in such a way that whatever the token the victim get for his password reset, the attacker also get it. Let's see how it's done. For a request here, it has a parameter called email and its value is equal to victim@email.com. So we manipulate this request in a way that we add an additional parameter email equal to a value attacker@email.com. And once we send this request, what happens? The same password reset token which is sent to victim is sent to the attacker also, which can lead to an account takeover. Here are some more manipulation techniques you can use. You can use space, separator, comma, etc. You can use CC and BCC in case of emails, and if your target is using JSON, you can add emails in an array format and send it. You can use same manipulation if your target website is utilizing mobile number for password reset token. Response manipulation. In response manipulation, what happens? You in simple way you can say the bad response is replaced with a good response. For example, you can see in the slide, if you get an unauthorized or unsuccessful request response for a request with a bad token or invalid token, you replace that response with a successful 200 OK response you got for a valid token, and you can manipulate the response in such a way. Next one is token leakage in response. What happened in token leakage? In some conditions, the website, when you request for password reset, the token will be present in the response itself. So it is crucial to find if the token is leaked in the response. So you can use Burp Suite search functionality, search for the token. You might find the token in the response or in some JavaScript. You can also add .json at the end of the password reset endpoint. This might result in showing the token in the response. Coming to the next one, password reset token leakage by referral header to third-party website. What happens here? When you visit password reset link which you got in your email, you click on it, you will be taken to a website, and in most of the password reset token website links, what happened in the footer section, they will be having the website's social media handles and other third-party website. There could be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. and some other third-party websites. If you click any of those and intercept the request and check the referral header, you will see the password reset token is there. It is leaking through referral header, and whoever controls the third-party website have the access to your password reset token. Next one is guessable token. It is crucial to find how your token is generated, whether it is guessable. How your token is generated, if it's generated by looking at its timestamp, user ID, email address, or is it using any weak cipher. Once you're able to identify this, how your token is generated, you can craft your own password reset token for any user and take over his account. Coming to the next one we can brute force the password reset token. In you can use Burp intruder for this, and if it have any restrictions, you can use IP rotate and use some additional headers to bypass. Coming to the next one is ID and homograph attack, where in simple words we can say we are using lookalike characters to trick the web application to give out the password reset token of our victim. For example, for testing, we can create an we can create an account with an email like test@gmail.com at burpcollaborator.net, and we ask the password reset with an email test@gmail.com.burpcollaborator.net. If you look at the emails which we provided for creating the account and password reset, you might think they are the same, but if you look closer, the A and the Gmail of the first one and the second are not the same. They look alike. We use this lookalike to trick the web application to give us the password reset token of the account which is lookalike to us. And if the web application give out the password reset token of the email which is looking exactly like this, and if we get that using a lookalike malicious email address, we can essentially take over the account. Next one, we can use a list of payloads as our email address, which can give us XSS, SQLI, SSTI, SSRF, etc. These are some payloads you can use for this particular exploitation. For an XSS, you can use a payload like this, an email, and we add an XSS payload, and we send this request. Once if the request is triggered, and we can escalate this to further. Next one is an interesting SQL injection found by Sunil. In one of his target, he found a time-based SQL injection in password reset functionality when he added a payload like xyz@gmail.com and a specially crafted time-based SQL injection payload, which tell the web application to sleep 20 seconds before it send the request, which help us to confirm it's a time-based SQL injection. Coming to the next one, if you're lucky, you can find OS command injection. You can provide a payload like this in the email section, and if you're lucky, you will get the command, the result of the command you sent in your Burp collaborator line. The next one is HTML injection in email. It is crucial to look whether the password reset request has any hidden parameters. You can identify hidden parameters using paraminer, an extension in Burp suite. And once you find parameters, you need to check whether if these parameters are reflecting in the email which is sent out when in the password reset is done. So Nigel found this particular target where he found that his parameter was reflecting in the email. He gave this particular parameter, and to his attacker server he got the password reset link, which lead to an account takeover. Next one is IDOR. In IDOR, what you can see in the request, what you can do, as an attacker you request for your password reset and you will get your token, and once you are changing the password, you simply change the email address or the user ID to victim's ID, and if that is successful, we can say there's an IDOR present and this can lead to an account takeover. Next one is XSE, XML external entity attack, where if your password reset endpoint support both JSON and XML, and the XML parser have some vulnerabilities, you can use content type converter to change the JSON to XML request, then add your XSE payload and wait for the ping in your server. By using XSE, you can read sensitive files, you can achieve SSRF and do port scan, etc. The next one is multiple factor authentication auto disabling after password reset. Sometimes after password reset is done, multiple factor authentications are automatically disabled. How you can check for them? You visit your account, enable your password reset, your 2FA there using Google Authenticator, Auth or any other provider. Then you log out from your account, you do a password reset, then try to log in again. Once you are logging back, if it does not prompt you for a 2FA code, you can say that after password reset the 2FA is automatically disabled. It's a misconfiguration. Next one is section expiration issues. So we can test whether there is a insufficient session expiration after password change happen. The testing can be done by opening an account into browser, and in browser 1 you can reset the password and see if the session is expired in the password browser 2. Next one is user enumeration. In user enumeration, what we can do, in password reset endpoint, with the difference in response the web application give, we can enumerate the username or email address. For example, if the web application give an response like user does not exist, if you provide an invalid username or email, and once you provide a valid email or username, it is giving a response like password reset token is sent your email. We can use this information to enumerate user or email addresses. Next one is missing rate limit. Using missing rate limit in password reset endpoint, you can do an email bombing. What I mean by email bombing, you can spam the email of a victim. Testing is easy. You just need to go to your password reset endpoint, you enter the email address of your victim and send it to intruder, start the attack, and after a couple of time you can visit the victim's account. You will see his account is completely filled with your spam mails from the application. That one handy tip here, you can use victim +1 and this number can be incremented using intruder to bypass some of the rate limit restrictions. Next one is reusable token. It is crucial to check whether your password reset token can be reused or if it's expired. Common test cases you can use is like you request for a password reset token, you change the password with using that token, and you try to change your password again using the same token. If it works, it's a vulnerability. One other test case you can use is requesting for multiple tokens and seeing if the old token still work even if the new one you already used. The other one more you can test case, one more you can use is you request for a password reset and you don't use that particular password reset token. Then you change the email address to a new email address in the account setting and see if the old password reset token is still usable, which you got in your previous email address. Here are some couple of resources I used for this talk. One is from my own blog, 10 password reset flows. Then there's an amazing slide by Mohammed, 8 password reset. Then there's a beautiful mind map by Harsh. You can check that out. So as it said, we are only as strong as our password and our password reset functionality. Thanks for listening to my talk. If you have any question, you can ask. The slides will be shared on my social media handles in Twitter and LinkedIn. That's all. Thanks everyone.
Our next speaker is Mr. Fardeen Ahmed, who would be speaking on thinking like a bug bounty hunter, approach and exploitation.
Hey there, hi, and welcome to GrabCON 2021. And today's topic of discussion will be thinking like a bug bounty hunter. So for the viewers who are watching this, they will be getting the idea about who a bug bounty hunter really is, how he approaches as a bug bounty hunter to his or her target or for the organization or whatever security research work he does, and how a bug bounty hunter views a technology and exploits for good. So let's get started, shall we? A very small introduction about myself. The name is Fardeen Ahmed, and I'm a security analyst and a researcher, just like all other researchers. I'm just like that. And I've been in cybersecurity from a very small age, like quite a young age. Okay. And as a hobby, I perform bug bounty hunting and play football. I love my Barcelona, by the way. And I'm pursuing my BTech degree from Bhopal University. One of the recent achievements what I have got from the Almighty's grace was to find that the very critical flaw within the CISF web application, that is a division of Defense of Department of Defense of Government of India, and in recent times I'll be getting awarded also. So let's hope I get it because they acknowledged it and they have told about it. So yeah, I got by the way, the flaw was admin panel access, and I was able to get through it. So apart from that, I have found flaws in the organization through RDPs on Ego, Canva, Dell, iCloud EMS, and many more. Okay, so a very small introduction. So today's topics of discussion will be who a bug bounty hunter is. Like we'll be revealing the fact and all the people's definition and a lot of people's view about what a bug bounty hunter is, and in the simplest way possible. Okay, so that you will be able to get to know about who a bug bounty hunter really is and what he or she does. Okay, we'll be getting to know about what is the difference of methodology of penetration tester and bug bounty hunter. In reality, a bug bounty hunting is a part of penetration testing only, but there will be some differences, and we'll be covering that out soon. Okay. Then we'll be having a distributive discussion on what OWASP top 10 is, like web application API vulnerabilities and web vulnerabilities and mobile vulnerabilities. We'll be moving forward towards how a bug bounty hunter labels a vulnerability with respect to his or her target. Like about one's view as a bug bounty hunter will be different than another person who is a bug bounty hunter's view. So we'll be sorting that out too. I'll be discussing about my process of reconnaissance also. Then we'll be discussing like a very small brief talk on what bug bounty hunters collaborate and security team and how they are able to work under one roof, although they are having some kind of differences, very small differences, but not that much of it. Like they pave a small difference, but both are somewhat the other way same. Okay. Second last, we'll be discussing about what should be the student's very first approach to get as a bug bounty hunter. Okay, so if the people who are in college and universities in first year or just started their life, you should learn something from this talk. Okay, like whatever I have learned in my life, and I believe that you should, and like seriously. And at last, I'll be like how to avoid duplicates and submissions, and conclude it with the beginning of the viewers for the bug bounty hunting, because this is the very first beginning to all the people. Okay, so let's get started. Now, really, who a bug bounty hunter really is. I don't know how many of you have seen watched the film Django Unchained. Okay, or Django Unchained. The film was that only. The film was all about bounty hunters. Like one of the part of it was about a bounty hunter who used to kill people or assassinate people, those people who were having some kind of reward or anything like that. And he was paid for killing that person. If he or she is able to reproduce that, yes, he is the only one or she is the only one who killed the target. Target means any person who was you can see that he is wanted and people having $10,000 of bounties and all those things. So the main reason of bounty hunters was they used to kill people. Now here in this profession, you don't have to kill anyone or anything, but you have to kill the flaws. Okay, so you're not killing any human being. Okay, bug bounty hunting is an approach, okay, through which a bug bounty hunter finds critical flaws, okay, whether it's small flaws, big flaws, large flaws, critical flaws, any kind of flaws, and he or she is able to reproduce that in front of a security team. Now, when they're able to reproduce in front of the security team as a return or as a token of appreciation, they believe that they should be rewarded with some kind of monetary award such as cash or a swag or anything like that, or he or she should be awarded with swags such as t-shirts, mugs, merchandise of that company, or at least to be famed as Hall of Fame in the websites and web applications. Okay. Now, Bug Bounty Hunter provides the freelance assist to organizations, especially to the security team, so that they can implement the very best to their assets of the organization, and they'll be able to patch most of the vulnerabilities. Recently, there was a breach of Accenture, and that happened because they didn't they had a VDP, but there were some critical flaws that was not patched or read up by or looked upon by the security team, and due to which a lot of PII, means personal identifier information, was exposed up just like that. So bug bounty hunters, in today there is a need a lot of bug bounty hunters if security team is not doing properly. So if a simple definition has to be put, then a bug bounty hunter is a person who finds security flaws in application, and in return he or she is rewarded. Any specific age of bug bounty hunting? Not at all. You can start from any age. You just in some countries there are some restrictions that you have to at least of a you should be permitted by, or you should have a permission through your parents or a consent of parent, but not all the countries. So you can move forward. So anyone can be a bug bounty hunter. So a bug bounty hunter's work is to find security flaws, which is also known as vulnerabilities or some kind of risks that are exploitable. We'll be discussing much more about it on websites and web applications or API, or sometimes in mobile applications also, like on Android applications. Then finding those flaws and reporting it ethically without disclosing it to any third party. Remember that if you disclose the type of vulnerabilities to any other person, then your validity of that disclosing and explaining it to the of getting it rewarded gets reduced as much as possible. So just like that. So you don't have to, so if you are a bug bounty hunter, you don't have to tell it to any other person, you just have to tell it to the organization till the time it is not patched. Once patched, you can tell it to any other person, no issues. And third is to work and collaborate with the security team so that to get a very good patch over it or remediation methods, and if not, then to disclose, then to enclose it till the time it is not patched or found a solution for it. Okay, so working with security teams and finding flaws and getting paid, and people are paid huge, like 10,000, 15,000, $20,000, or even if the least way possible, around $50, and it can range to amount like a lot of it. Till that, it depends upon what is the severity of the flaw, which is also known as a bug. Okay, and in return, a bug bounty hunter expect monetary rewards. So this monetary reward is always judged under RDPs or VDPs, which is known as Responsible Disclosure Program or Vulnerability Disclosure Programs. Not VDP, all VDPs are not payable. Like RDPs are payable, but see, the definition changes from place to place. Okay, so RDPs are like they pay you in their report, but VDPs they pay you in different way. They pay doesn't pay you through, they don't pay you through cash, but they pay you through T-shirts, swag, stickers, any kind of that. Okay, and for other for RDPs they can provide you with monetary rewards also. And people generally, get enlisted in Hall of Fame for finding vulnerabilities in their security wall. Security wall means there will be a web page of that website that will be thanking these people, or a list of people, or just you, if you find any vulnerability. And that's itself is a kind of reputation. You can just add it in your resume and you can tell that yes, I have worked under their RDP and I find flaws in it. So it's a good thing for all students. It's a very good thing. Now we'll be discussing about what specifically is the difference between what penetration tester is and a bug bounty hunter is. Okay, now this is my, by the way, this is my definition or my equation of telling it. By the way, it's not a improper, it's not a proper one, it's an improper one. So in my eyesight, penetration tester is equal to layman tester. He can be a dynamic tester also, it's no issues, definitely he can be. Now the work of penetration tester is to find, be with the red team, or if not a red team, then security team of that organization. And his work is to obviously finding security flaws in the website, web application, network, operating system, and internal source codes. Okay. Now the internal source code review of the older and newer software projects and finding the best mitigation process, mitigation is penetration testers work. Okay. So a penetration tester work is not confined till the time he or she is instructed by the organization. If an organization instructs a penetration tester that yes, you can penetrate, you can just go through just a subsection of a section of the finding the area, like a section of an area, then only penetration tester can test only in that section. Like you get a park, and within a park, if you just take it out of section, that yes, that playable area should only be the place where you can test your things. So penetration tester is not allowed to work in any other three periods, means places, but it varies. Now for example, if a person is able, like we'll be discussing, okay, the second thing is the source code analysis. Now source code analysis means that the organization put their generally what it happens, like generally organizations show their source code about their application regarding this is the application, and if any attack happens, like general attack happens, then the penetration tester gets through it and looks forward about what the source code of that, or of that application that was that infected the organization is, and reviews about it. Reviews in the sense it checks most of the lines regarding what is the error, he or she debugs it, finds the flaws, just like a tester or a just like a developer who wants to work it. But penetration tester does it in the most intrusive way and offensive way possible, and find it each kind of vulnerabilities, like whatever it be, whether it's functional reliability of defects, or it is regarding functions deformations, such as calling out multiple functions at a single time. So there are a lot of things that can happen. Okay, a simple functionality can also be a flaw if not treated properly. So that type of things is being done in the source code analysis. And the third point is work methodology. Now, the biggest difference between a pen tester and a bug bounty hunter is assets of testing. Generally, a penetration tester is given the complete organization's access, and is being said to find whatever kind of flaws you can find, even risks. There is a difference between what a risk and vulnerability is. We'll be discussing more in the bug bounty section. Okay, so work methodology is completely like he will be finding the assets. Like he will be given all the kind of assets. Assets means every section of that company. Most of the time it happens. Like every section of that company is being given, whether it's network, whether it's system, operating system, whether it's a website or web application, or testing any APIs, or testing on any Android application, anything. Penetration tester is given that much amount of permissions, and he can or she can literally test over all those things and can formulate a report and give it back to the organization, and in return, as the payment has to be done way before it has been dealt as an agreement, it is being paid to the person. So that this is the very big difference between a penetration tester and a bug bounty hunter, is there is no limitation of scope generally. Now many a times what happens that penetration testers are also confined at one place, so it happens. But this is the penetration testing methodology. The very first thing is identification of assets. Now organization tell the penetration tester, like for example, total 5 subsections are there. 5 sections are there. You can test on all the 5s or any 5 or whatsoever you want to test. You have to collaborate with the defensive team or the blue team, and you have to work over it. The second thing is the reconnaissance of and the collection of data. Now, pen testers methodology and bug bounty hunters methodology is quite different in this way. For example, penetration tester is not at all reliable. It's not at all what you say. It's not a person. He or she is not a person who is to be relied in such a way that any kind of misuse that has been done by him or will be done in the future, he is not the person to be blamed as. Okay, so the reconnaissance of collection of target through a person should be like the person will be collecting all the previously dealt data, previously reports, all the previous reports that consists of most of the vulnerabilities or attack that has been found in years to the organization, and she then goes through it and finds out that okay, so these are the places through which it was there was some issues, like this is the place through which this happened, or there was something which is known as some function was called out, but it was some functions were declared but not called out, but at server side it can be called out by third party. So these are some of the things that she gets through it. Then factors of vulnerabilities. Again, one of the factors of the finding a vulnerability there are many ways through which factors can be found, either through scanners or through manually. Manual testing takes quite a time, but still penetration testing is quite good. So reconnaissance of and collection of target is very much necessary. Okay. The fourth is the implementation of corrective actions. Now, by the time penetration testers get to know about what are the factors of the vulnerabilities, she will be working on the implementation part, like what should be the mitigational things and procedures through which one company should follow in such a way that company will be able to get to know the things about, yeah, these are the vulnerabilities that should be patched and should not be patched and everything like that. Okay, so these are the corrective implementations, and even she tries with the security team to patch it. And the fifth is the future implications. Now suppose these patches, whatever is being, one or the other day, one day or like in the future upcoming days, that patch is going to get defected or can get older up, and it can pose some kind of vulnerability for sure. That's why companies are generating new patches. So penetration testing tester tells that what can be the future implementation or implications through that patch. So these are the 5 steps that a penetration tester generally uses. She can take bug bounty methodology also for finding vulnerability. That's not at all a big deal. She can do it because bug bounty hunting is a very integral part of a penetration testing procedure only. But there are a lot of things that is not covered out in a bug bounty hunting thing. Now, bug bounty hunting methodology. Simple. Bug bounty hunter equals to dynamic tester. Bug bounty hunter's work is simple to find one thing, and that is security flaws that are exploitable. Now, why I am giving stress that this much to exploitable? Many times what happens, I've seen my students that they just post it about finding it on any program such as on Bugcrowd or HackerOne. that they find vulnerability and they're like, yes, I have posted this vulnerability. Yes, I should be I should be awarded with rewards for finding flaws. This is not a flaw. Finding risk is not at all a flaw. Suppose if you get a, I'll be discussing very small, vulnerability such as DMARC record vulnerability. That's ain't a vulnerability. That's a risk. Okay. Now, if you chain it with rate limit things like email excess of email on the inbox and all triggering and all those things and no headers at all, so this is a kind of vulnerability. Okay, but if you just find out that yes, this is not a DMARC record is not there, so it means that this is not a vulnerability. It's a risk. Okay, risk is a thing which means that it might be a vulnerability, but it's not compulsory that it is a vulnerability. That's why most of the companies or the BDB programs don't award you with points and all those things. So first thing, bug bounty hunters way thing is to find security flaws which are exploitable and vulnerabilities that are exploitable, and should create a report and send a POC to the organization only and only when he or she is able to find about all the things. Like he is able to find about what vulnerabilities or like what vulnerability he got it and the risk he got it and it's exploitable. Then only it's rewardable. And beware that you have to report it way before the other security researchers or bug bounty hunters, else you won't be getting any kind of bounty. Second is to finding the exploitable bugs, means exploitable vulnerability. If a risk is exploitable, you should definitely report it. But if it is not, then don't do it. Third and the most important thing, the work methodology. The bug bounty hunters are generally working under a confined asset only. They are not to be dealt with networks of that organization. They are only to be dealt with the web applications or APIs or any other asset that is being introduced by the by the organization. They don't have to deal with networks. They don't have to deal with systems and security and anything like that or operating system. Okay, so they have to work with the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities that comes under them, and they have to give a justified report to let them be the person who to be rewarded as a bug bounty hunter. So remember these things. This is the very big difference between a bug bounty hunter and a penetration tester, and that is the difference of asset. The bug bounties hunter methodology is simple. First, reading the information of the RDPs, VDP very carefully. Why? Because many a times students, what happened is they find vulnerabilities, they find risks, okay, that are not exploitable. It has been explained by many people that yes, they should do this kind of flaws, and this flaw is nothing but a vulnerability. No, you have to exploit that vulnerability and then find out that whether this vulnerability is exploitable or not. Always very first read their RDPs. For example, you find SSR, server-side request forgery kind of vulnerability, or cross-site request forgery. Now that organization accepts the cross-site request forgery, accept this server-side request forgery, but doesn't accept CSR, means cross-site request forgery. Or let us suppose in the most easy way possible. Let's suppose an organization accepts SQL injection as a vulnerability but doesn't consist of accesses to be a vulnerability. And you found out that there is an accesses which is indexed under OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. But even if you report it to them, they are not going to give you anything. They are not going to reward only. And they'll just say that this was not what we were expecting. So read the documentation RDP or VDP very much carefully. Second, working on dynamic reconnaissance. What dynamic reconnaissance? Only very first recon on only those vulnerabilities that are being listed under the RDPs. This is a very big difference between a normal bug bounty hunter versus quite an experienced bug bounty hunter. So if you want to be an experienced bug bounty hunter, do remember first find those vulnerabilities only which are present in the RDPs. Then read that whether if you can find any other kind of vulnerabilities. If they say that yes, any kind of other vulnerabilities that exposes these following things are also considered as a vulnerability. What? For example, personal identifiable information, or any company's asset that are not to be tested but still it is exposing the internal data or testing data. So these things are to be dealt with. These things are to be dealt with very carefulness through a new bug bounty hunter. Okay. Third is finding flaws, which is quite easy. You have to find flaws that are exploitable, not those risks that are not at all exploitable. If the risk is not exploitable, just don't do it. It is going to waste a lot of your time, and it is going to consume your, that boost or within yourself, that adrenaline that you get. It is going to consume everything about it. So just don't pay that much attention to those things. Fourth is writing the report. You have to write as accurate report as possible. You don't have to write a very big report. You don't have to write a very, very small report. Just like 2 lines, I found a vulnerability, you should pay me. No. Don't do like that. Okay. Try to create or find a vulnerability. Whatever you found a vulnerability, create your own report. Don't copy it from the internet. Read through the internet, get to know about what the vulnerabilities are. Write your own steps of reproduction. Steps of reproduction means how you were able to find this vulnerability. Write it, and if possible, give those a POC or proof of concept through, not through a video, but through images. Because let's face it, the people who are work as a triager, they have a lot of work, and the more convenient report you will give it to them, even they will be rewarding you bonus of bounties. Okay, like if you give like for example, yes, you were able to reproduce in cross-site scripting, you reproduce at this point in this position at this time and everything, they will be rewarding you. Why? Because you gave it to on the accurate position and accurate pace and accurate time. They will be like, okay, this person has helped us a lot. Like he or she gave the the most optimized steps of reproduction, so they'll be giving you more of the bounty sometimes. And fifth is the patience and unexpectations. Just don't, after giving that, yes, I found a vulnerability, then just don't think over that vulnerability only. Just don't think at all. You have given it, just wait now. Wait and work over other fields of vulnerabilities. Like you found a cross-site scripting on one domain, for example, example.com. Now find SQL injection or find any kind of vulnerabilities. Generally what happens, people are like, found a vulnerability and waiting for the reply. Don't do that. That is going to consume a lot of time of yours. So don't do that. Just don't do that. That is going to take a lot of time. So this is what a bug bounty hunter methodology generally looks like. Next is about the OWASP top 10 web application API and mobile vulnerabilities. OWASP web application security project, or means OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, is OWASP was generally a project. Okay, right now it has become an organization. It was started by through nerds, and they believed that there should be some work of security research and all those things, and they were able to get to the best things. Like they were able to get the best security bugs and flaws in their time as well as right now, and they are working continuously every day. And the work of OWASP as an organization is to index all the vulnerabilities and to explain it in front of you, like give it back to the community in such a way that can be referenced back if any other organization gets affected through any kind of security flaws. The project is simple to find and index new vulnerabilities. So if anyone here as a viewer who is a developer, simply can go on GitHub and check out on OWASP place, and that's going to help you a lot. Like new bug bounty hunters, go through the documentation of OWASP top 10. That is going to help you a lot. OWASP top 10 web application methodologies include injection attacks. Injection attacks include SQL injection, famous cross-site scripting, command injection, SST, any kind of injection attack. It consists of the injection section only. Second is broken authentication and session management. Now, broken authentication means, for example, you were able some of the vulnerabilities that comes under broken authentication and session management include failure to invalidate session, then consists of admin panel bypass, that I was able to get it on CISF web application, then session fixation, then account lockout, then no password policy authorities, and there are a lot of vulnerabilities that are present in it. Okay, you can check out on OWASP top 10 website and you can get through it. Third is the sensitive data exposure, which is quite very much informative. Many times what happens is developers finding or creating a web applications and connecting with the APIs and the backend and all those things. Sometimes what they do, they are forget or unintentionally create a file that is being placed at the backend of the of the website, and in return it consists of a lot of information. Sometimes it consists of PIIs also, but sometimes it consists of less but informative information about that company, which is quite dangerous to be exposed to the normal user, or in the worst case to an attacker. So if one finds it and reports it, that comes under sensitive data exposure. Then comes an external entity. You can find it on ovas.in web application. Then broken access control. This is about getting one of the like from my sense, it is like one of the methodology, one of the vulnerability that comes under broken access control is IDOR, which is indirect object referencing. It is like you work as a user, but you are able to access a lot of top secret kind of user account interaction. So for example, you are a user, but you are able to access the admin control and to the places, although you are not able to, you didn't logged in through an admin panel or through an admin, as an admin, but through this IDOR or broken access control, you are able to get to the admin as and became as an admin or get admin control. So this, it comes under broken access control. Then a security misconfiguration that comes under TLS, SSL kind of vulnerabilities. You can check it out on that place. It is like you finding on HTTP, there is no HTTPS, so it comes under security misconfiguration. Then is cross-site scripting. Cross-site scripting is that vulnerability where a JavaScript code is, when a malicious actor, means an attacker, works over parameter. Okay, he or she puts it on the parameter. He is able to feed the parameter with malicious codes. That's backend. The code of the JavaScript codes breaks up, and when it breaks up, the callout of that function comes as a pop-up, which returns the code which consists of malicious output. This kind of cross-site scripting or XSS is known as reflected. There are two other variants also, which is stored and DOM. Those are triggered in different ways. You can check it out and you can work over it. Then is insecure deserialization. Then you have using components of known vulnerability. It is like using, for example, you use using Apache of 1 point some version. So it's a depleted version. It consists of a lot of vulnerabilities. So people should generally use Apache 2.0 vulnerability, 2.0 what you say, services, so servers and services. So if an organization is not using it, then it is a vulnerability. It is not a risk. If it will be a risk only if it is not exploitable. But let's face it, Apache 1.0 will be having a lot of vulnerabilities as compared to the furthermore, which is Apache 2 point something. So it will be a vulnerability. And last is insufficient logging and monitoring. That is generally looked up through a lot of scanners and all those things. Check it out on the OWASP web application, please. Next is OWASP top 10 API vulnerabilities. First is BOLA, or broken object level authorization. This is similar to indirect object referencing. The second is broken user authentication or broken authentication, the same thing. Third is excessive data exposure, the same thing, but you have to work through fuzzles to get the excessive data exposure. Fourth is rate of resource sharing and rate limiting. Now, rate limiting is a vulnerability where a person is able to trigger an API to call more than it's sufficient or desired time. Now, for example, what happens generally now, rate limitings like through if I have to explain it, let's explain it through email trigger only. What happens is an application is set to send an email once if a request is made. Now, what if one person is able to reroute this functionality to a vulnerability in such a way that one count is changed to more than 1 or 10 or 100, then 100 times the email is sent to the user, which quite makes it very much difficult to set and reset password and all those things. So there are a lot of things. Then is broken function level authorization. This is about getting an admin access. It is somewhere similar to BOLA, but it's not completely similar. Then mass assignment, you can check it out on API vulnerabilities. Security misconfiguration, same. Injection attack, as discussed previously. Improper assets management. Many times what happened is an organization is not able to give it to you the best proper optimized solution. So what happens is OWASP is generally not working over it. They are like, okay, OWASP created this section in such a way that Many times APIs are revealing unnecessary sections of the web application that should not be available to the normal user. So that's how this vulnerability is or works. And the last one is insufficient logging and monitoring. And the last one what we'll be discussing is the mobile risks. The same place, OWASP, you can get it about it, everything about it, like improper platform usage, insecure data, communication, authentication, cryptography, authorization, client code quality, and these things. You can work over it. These are generally dealt with by penetration testers and not that much about to bug bounty hunters, but still people should, bug bounty hunters, new people should know about it. That is how a bug bounty hunter labels a vulnerability. It's easy. Very first thing, identification of the asset, as explained. He or she finds about what our target is. Second is the extra focus on providing the vulnerabilities of the organization that is interested. Now, if an organization says that yes, only XSS is required or CSRF is only required, it is not. There is nothing which is more to be required. Then why to work on that much, right? Not to work that much on any other vulnerabilities. If you're not able to find any other kind of vulnerability, but you found out this, then definitely you should work over it. The third is good knowledge of vast top 10 vulnerabilities and have an RTFM, Ready Field Manual. It helps you a lot of times. It helps you a lot of times with different kinds of tools and mechanisms. Okay. Work on those vulnerabilities that are always prominent, such as broken authentication and improper access vulnerabilities. These are not mitigated through scanners or automated tools, believe me. These are always there. You can always hunt out and you will always be getting bounty through it. And fifth, don't copy anyone's report. Believe me, make your own report, take some time, create your own report, and then always report your own, create your own report and then do it. This increases your chances for about like 20% to get bounty. Then these are some of the ways through which security researchers, same bug bounty hunters, are labeling their vulnerabilities, focus on the targets, saving the time. Like time saving is very much important bug bounty hunting because it's a huge time. You are giving a lot of time to the organization regarding that. So this should, like, time should be conserved in the most optimized way possible. And third is chaining vulnerabilities. Suppose you get a cross-site scripting, try to escalate, or you get an open redirection. Try to escalate that open redirection vulnerability to cross-site scripting. You should do it. You'll be, if you'll be getting $300 for open redirect by chaining it, you'll be getting 700, 900, or sometimes $1,200 bounty also. So very first, focus on target. Second, save your time and research on only those vulnerabilities first that are being accepted by the organization. And third is chaining the vulnerabilities. Then is like, see, many times what happens is bug bounty hunters work continuously with security team. And as sometimes what happens is security teams are always thankful to those bug bounty hunters. They're like, okay, you are doing good, you're doing awesome, you're working for us and you're helping us. So many times what happens is security team offer the bug bounty hunters to work with them in a continuous way. So you can get quite a bounty, like not a bounty, but you can get a job also. So if you're doing bug bounty hunting in a regular basis, you can get jobs also. So you should try it, definitely. Then it's student's guide for getting started as a bug bounty hunter, the most fascinating part, I guess. Very first thing, students should be very much clear with the concept of what web technologies are, should know about what HTTP and HTTPS is, proxies, networks, operating system, as well as OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. Work on platforms such as Sportswagger Academy, TryHackMe, and Hack the Box. My personal favorite is Sportswagger Academy because, see, most of the people here right now are not readers. So I would be saying, if you want to do and learn practically, go for Sportswagger Labs. That's going to help you a lot more than anything else. And if, for example, if you're not continuous with the labs, like for example, if you don't have that much amount of Wi-Fi or anything like that, download the DBWI labs and practice on that. That is going to clarify your most of the bugs and flaws and all those things. You can read these books also. Web Hackers Handbook. That's the Bible of, like most of the people say that it's the Bible of bug bounty hunting. You can go through it, and security research. And then it's Web Hacking 101. It consists of a lot of referenced vulnerable reports. You can go through it, but I would be suggesting most probably you should go to Sportswagger Academy, and if you have that much amount of money, you can take a prime subscription of Hack the Box and TryHackMe also. And then how to avoid duplicates and be self-motivated. This section is always asked by my students, like, sir, I posted that, but I didn't get it. I'm feeling very bad. I found that much time. See, bug bounty hunting is going to consume a lot of your time. Believe me. Very first thing, leave the expectations about any kind of bounty or monetary rewards or swags and less stress of getting bugs. Many a times what happens is you get a duplicate bug and still you get rewarded. So just lay yourself to find as much as bugs as possible and be ready. And yes, of course, keep your syllabus to minimum. There are many people who will be saying that follow this, follow that. No, first follow the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. Get to know about it. Then read a lot of write-ups as much as possible. Reading is going to help you out more than following any kind of courses. Believe me. Second is finding one flaw or a bug at one time. Suppose you are good with XSS, find and perfect your cross-site scripting vulnerability or abilities. Finding that cross-site scripting vulnerability as much as possible. Okay, perfect that thing. Then move towards injection and any other kind of injection or SQL injection, anything like that. Work on one vulnerability first, then find that vulnerability. Work on second and third, fourth, and that's how you progress. Just don't watch over LinkedIn that they are posting about bounties. Just don't see it. Okay, sometimes just ignore that post only. Try to ignore as much as possible. Third, think creatively. When you're able to think creatively, you write a very creative report and you'll be given extra bounty. Simple. So think creatively. Fourth is be ready for any kind of repercussions. Repercussions, there will always be repercussions. Okay, what is a repercussion? For example, you get the best thing, like you get a $300 bounty. It's a very good thing. But even if sometimes what happens if you get the best bugs also, there are a lot of good bug hunters that I have known personally as a friend, as a mentor, anyone like Aditya Shende. I know about Pratik Dabi. I know about Pawan Chaudhary. Then Tuhin Bose. There are a lot of people. They have founded Vikas Chaudhary himself, who is regarded as one of the finest bug bounty hunters of our country. Okay, so he has done most of the reports are being rewarded only through creativity. So create a sense of creativity within yourself as a security researcher or bug bounty hunter. Okay, right in that way. So fourth is completed. Fifth is have a ready to learn mindset. If you don't know one vulnerability, learn about it. See the chaining, how that vulnerability is chained with any other kind of flaw, and how you can escalate it to next level so that your chances of getting bounty is more. First, try to search in these way possible. It is going to help you a lot in it. Okay. Sixth, finding dupes sometimes is much more dupes or duplicate bugs are much more rewardable than any other kind of bugs. Believe me, because one time what happened is I found a bug in an RDP and they said that it's a duplicate, but still you were able to find in a very different way rather than the previous bug hunter. They still rewarded me with the Hall of Fame. So sometimes dupes are very much good. So it's a very good thing. Seventh, always know the difference between what a risk is and what a vulnerability is. As explained way before, finding a demarc record is a risk, and exploiting that through rate limiting or anything like that is that exploitation pose a vulnerability to that risk. Okay, so like that. Eighth is accept your failures and learn from it. Many times it happens that no, yeah, I was not able to get to know that yeah, this is a vulnerability. I reported it, but still like I should leave bug bounty hunting. See, if you believe that you don't have patience, then don't come near to bug bounty hunting. Believe me, you will be needing a lot of patience in bug bounty hunting. So make it this as your part-time work. All the students who are new to it, make this as a part-time. If you don't have anything to do, then do this thing. If you're like straight for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, you don't have anything to do, try to take it out and learn this thing. Rather than spending your time on series, you can do this thing. Simple. Like many a times I've seen that they're completing series by series and they're just completing it. So do that thing. Ninth is your best friend is Google. So either you ask through the community. Asking the community is the easiest way possible. You can ask people like I'm not able to find any kind of vulnerability. How should I deal with this? So find those kind of people. Find within a community. Ask that community people and ask from Google also. Learn dorking, by the way. Google Docs help you a lot of times. Okay. Ask those people. Just be ready to ask from the people and be ready to learn it. It doesn't matter what your age is. Many times it happens. I have asked through a lot of my students also that I'm not able to escalate this thing. Can you help me out? They have helped me out and I've got all of them. So it's a good thing. Ask from people. And the last one, 10, is read write-ups of most of the security researchers every day. I have known one of the finest bug bounty hunters from like my circle, Tuhin Bose, that he reads every day like around 10 to 20 write-ups. So 10 to 20 write-ups or 30 write-ups every day. It's not a small thing. I've seen Aditya Shinde's way of doing things, like 1 month completely doing his own work, and reading as much as possible. So read the write-ups of others, then only you'll be able to grow. For example, you will be finding a kind of vulnerability to be escalated in a very difficult way. The other researcher have found out way before in the most easy and optimized way possible. So you will be moving towards that thing. So read as much as possible. This is the very last advice that I'll be giving you. Read one flow at a time, but read every day. That is going to help you out a lot. Be consistent and be determined. Okay. So in that way, I'll be just concluding it in front of you all. And I would be saying you to, open your mind. If you are a student, just get started right now in the field of bug bounty hunters. I'm telling you, it is going to be a very profitable thing. You will be disappointed because there is no field in this world that through which you will never be disappointed. And your disappointment is going to enrage you to the next level of finding good type of vulnerabilities. Go through it and learn as much as possible. Now these are the places through which I am always available. You can ping me out, or you can just post your questions also. I'll be delighted to help you out. I won't be that much fast to reply, but I will reply. Don't worry. I do reply because sometimes it takes a lot of time. I'm also a human just like you all. So read as much as possible. Take some time if you're not able to get to know about the vulnerabilities, and be ready to learn every day by day. Okay, so have a follow-up if you wish to, because I always post new posts and all those things. You can follow up. You can follow up at these places also. I post some tips and tricks also on Twitter and all those things. And you can go for Quora also for direct question and Q&A and all those things. So by this I will be just concluding, and hopefully it helps you out. And this, I know it might sound kind of boring, but still I believe that this should help you out in getting started as a bug bounty hunter. So take care to all the viewers and also to the non-viewers, and all praise to the Almighty. And let's make bug bounty hunting to be one of the finest things in the world for all the students. Keep shining, keep rocking, and have a great time at GrabCON 2021. Take care. Namaskar.
Our next speaker is Darkstar, who would be telling about how gamification is reshaping information bit by bit.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me here at GrabCON. I'm John, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the topic of gamification in my presentation, Tetramedos, Workflows, and the Global Economy. How gamification is reshaping information security bit by bit. That being said, let's go ahead and dive right in. So first things first, here's a quick background info on who I am. I am a pen tester here for State Farm in the United States. Additionally, I am the content director and community manager for TryHackMe. And last but certainly not least, I am one of the leads for the InfoSec Librarians Guild project. Moving on, let's look at what this talk is going to be about. Here's a quick thesis just to give you an idea of what we're going to be going through over the course of this topic on the whole. Gamification is the evolution of learning at its finest, and this is no different within InfoSec. As we embrace gamification, we can further learning and strengthen our industry on the whole, and that's something that we'll see very heavily as we go throughout these next slides. Moving on, let's talk about what is a game. A game, there are a lot of things come to mind when we're first thinking about what a game is, but it's more of a complex topic when you talk about what a game is at its core. As far as modern examples, the big three that come to mind at first are video games, which you can see over there on the right with the Nintendo Game Boy, board games, and even puzzles. But taking a step back, we can see that a game ultimately is entertainment married with challenge and growth. You can have challenging games that you need to get better at. You need to gain skills and experience by playing the game in order to move further. You can have creative games like Animal Crossing or things like that you increase your skill by playing and by experimenting. But we can see that overall, this idea of challenge and growth are really present. And we'll dive into that further as we go throughout this talk. Let's move on to talking about one of my favorite games personally of all time, Tetris. Now, Tetris is nothing short of fascinating. You'll see a little note there on the bottom of the box art from Russia with fun. Tetris is incredibly historical just because of the influence that this game has had across generations and across the world. So this next bit is more or less straight from Wikipedia. Tetris was created in 1984 by Russian software engineer Alexei Pajitnov. This was when he worked at the Russian Academy of Sciences, I believe. Originally designed for the Electronica 60 computer, that was a replica or kind of a spin-off of a computer that we had here in the West, Tetris became a cultural phenomenon which has transcended generations and even the Iron Curtain. While the history and copyrights of this game are nothing short of incredible, our focus today is on games and gamification overall. So why Tetris? And just a quick meta note on this, I highly recommend looking up. There is a video by the gaming historian on the history of Tetris. It is about an hour long, well worth your time. Tetris is just fascinating, and I recommend diving into it. Now, let's talk about what is Tetris. If you've never played it, Tetris is a game that consists of placing these blocks that fall from the top of the screen to the bottom, and those blocks are called tetrominoes. You can see some there on the right. Those blocks are made up of, or shapes that are made up of 4 individual blocks that create a good variety that you have to use to fill lines on the screen and ultimately gain score. So here you have this idea of a sense of accomplishment, be a score, and yet you have a continuing challenge where the game gets faster and faster as you play more and more. And furthermore, you have the introduction of strategy in that you can get more points for clearing multiple lines at once. In the case of clearing 4 lines, you get a Tetris, and even in some other Tetris games, you get even more bonuses and things like that. That being said, we can see how there's an addictive cycle that's started to kick in with even just a simple game like this. Tetris, one of the most magical points before I move on to my next slide, is that no matter even if you don't speak the language that the game's in, Tetris is very easy to understand. When you pick it up, it's a very simple concept, it's very straightforward, and it's almost like this universal communication between you and the game that makes it just riveting to pick up. Now, taking a step back from Tetris, let's talk about how that ties into gamification by taking a look at what gamification is overall. So for gamification, I'm going to be using the Octalysis framework. This was developed by Yukai Cho. Apologies if I butchered his name. The Octalysis framework is a human-centric gamification design that lays out the core drives for motivation. Leveraging this, we can start to break down where and how gamification works. Now, this framework was originally created by Yukai Cho after I believe he was playing Diablo 2, and his friends stopped playing. They slowly just petered off, and then he realized he was the only one playing the game out of his friend group, and he took a step back and he felt this sort of looming dread. And it was this idea that, he had spent a lot of time on this video game and he was wondering what he had gotten out of it. And he wanted to take a step back even further and start to break down why he was compelled to spend so much time playing Diablo 2 and playing other video games in general, and what exactly the driving factors are behind that. And using that and exploring his own drives, he found the framework of Octalysis, which we'll go ahead and break down here. So Octalysis is made up of, as you would have guessed, 8 core drives, and we're going to go ahead and break those down one by one. The first drive here is this idea of epic meaning and calling. When you enter the world of a video game, you have this idea that you're doing this for the greater good. In the case of, like end of the world games, you have this idea that you need to defeat the big bad in order to actually, you have this greater purpose in life. A great example of this is the Legend of Zelda series, where you have to defeat Ganon in nearly every game, and it's to stop this sort of apocalyptic enslavement of humanity, or what humanity is left. And it's a very compelling drive overall. The next one that we have, Core Drive 2, is development and accomplishment. I alluded to this earlier with the idea of skill, but you want to have this idea that when you're looking at a game, you can see this progress bar, you can see these accomplishments that you've got. In the example of Xbox, Gamer Score, you have PlayStation trophies, things like that, that make you feel that you've gained something, you've grown, and that your progress is measured. A good example of this is the world map in Mario, where you have these individual levels that you have to clear, and it shows on the world map afterwards that you've cleared everything until you just have Bowser's Castle left there. Moving on, we have core drives 3 and 4. Number 3 is the empowerment of creativity and feedback. Animal Crossing is an excellent idea for both of these core drives. And let's go ahead and talk about core drive 4 before I talk about the game overall. Core drive 4 is this idea of ownership and possession, and these core drives really go hand in hand. Because when you're putting in this effort, you want to have ownership to be able to show that your creative prowess is growing. Or maybe you're taking a step back, looking at like fighting games or brawlers. You come up with a creative solution to beat a boss, or maybe a new combo that, it works really well against how your opponent's fighting style. But in the Animal Crossing games, you have this idea of your island, specifically in the newest one, New Horizons, where you have this huge creative canvas. And on that space, you have, this idea of ownership, but you can do with it whatever you want. You can show it off, and there's this huge sharing community factor. And those both drives are incredibly compelling. If you have any doubts on this, I recommend looking at the Animal Crossing community. There are some incredibly creative people out there, and it shows just how powerful those drives are. Moving on, we have core drives 5 and 6. So number 5 is social influence and relatedness. This has been a core drive that has really grown, especially with the idea of online multiplayer and tournaments, where you have this idea that if you are the best in the world, for example, at Call of Duty, you are the best in the world. You've won a tournament. Counter-Strike has a very big community around this, and you have this community of people that you can talk to and be able to relate to them. And then core drive 6, scarcity and impatience. That's something that goes more or less hand in hand with this one as well, but has some different ideas mixed in. Scarcity, only one person can be the best. Impatience, you have time trials and you have tournaments. You have a round timer in a lot of games. You can see how these things start adding up, and we'll get into the last 2 core drives in a moment, but these start adding up to really push you towards whatever goal the developer of either a game or whatever situation wants to push you towards. Moving on to core drives 7 and 8, we have the idea of unpredictability and curiosity. If you've ever read a book and you just get to the point where you just need to keep continuing on, you need to know what happens on the next page, this is that drive. The idea of exploration and wondering what is going to come next. And you have this idea over on the side where, for example, with the Nathan Drake games or other games like Tomb Raider, that this exploration really is the main core drive. And we'll talk about how these drives mix and how we can have sort of different levels coming up here in a couple slides. But the last drive that we have here, and this gets into what is referred to as sort of black hat, not to be confused with black hat hacking, but black hat game design, where you have this idea of loss and avoidance. This is a core drive that really comes into focus with the Dark Souls or Souls-like games, where dying in those games, it sucks. it's a huge consequence, and you can see immediately the consequences of your actions at play. That's sort of a negative impetus, but you can see how that can drive you. Moving on, we can start to see, and apologize for the low resolution image here, you can start to see how we can measure these different core drives, and we can see how a different situation might have more of one than another, and sometimes might just not have very much of one in general. But you can see this broken down into the 8 core drives per each situation, and in this case being building up a plot. You can see how those core drives can evolve throughout the actual game, and how we can start measuring them and putting them into practice. That being said, let's move into InfoSec. I mean, we're hackers here. Let's talk about how this actually matters beyond just, hacking our brains. So, taking a step back to TryHackMe. This is just a quick history lesson to walk into how we got to gamification with TryHackMe. This was founded in 2018 by Ben, he goes by Skitty, and then Ashu. I joined just a couple months in. I ended up getting involved with, I had created a box that eventually became known as Blue. I had created it for a cyber defense competition, or rather a cyber defense club that I was running at the time, because I wanted a good exercise that had some of these ideas of gamification in it. And eventually just ended up getting involved and joined on with the team. From this, with starting things off, and this is something that Ben and Ashu really focused on, was this idea of the state of learning in InfoSec. Now, anyone who's tried to do some learning in InfoSec will be able to comment on this pretty thoroughly, that it can come across as fragmented, especially because it's a relatively new field in the grand scheme of things. And with fragmentation comes this idea of it potentially being inaccessible. That's a problem. That is a big problem. Ultimately, especially as you move into more higher difficulty levels within InfoSec, you can see that this is difficult on a good day. Things don't always make sense, and there's a lot of room for improvement, and that's something that TryHackMe ultimately was founded on. And one of my favorite ideas here is the analogy of a ladder. A ladder being the ideas of the different steps that you have to take to learn something. You can't skip over one topic. It doesn't really work that well. And you can't skip rungs on a ladder. From that, you start building up this idea of a learning path and start trying to work your way backwards from maybe you learned something, but you have to learn how you learned it. And that's really where we start seeing a lot of the motivation behind TryHackMe. Moving into this idea of redefining InfoSec education. We wanted to take a look at where was change actually possible. And from this, we found 3 core ideas. First and foremost, we had this idea of addressing the beginner. Then we had don't try harder, try again. That is actually a quote from John Hammond that I just love. And then the idea of security as a game of exposure. Let's break down these ideas. First, we have the concept of addressing the beginner. We wanted to start from fresh with learning, trying to take a step back and trying to figure out where there was a lot of room for growth. Where were those missing rungs? And ultimately, we needed to take a look at what we were learning, what we knew from InfoSec, and tried to consider what had to come before that. So maybe to use Nmap properly, you needed to know networking, you needed to know IP addressing, at least a little bit. And we had to have this idea of where do you first start your journey? Because, everyone wants to start, but sometimes finding that place to start is the hardest part. Moving on to the idea of don't try harder, try again. We wanted to examine this idea of punishment and reward. With this, we had a really big idea of the removal of punishment with the focus on learning and improvement, because if you're learning InfoSec, it's probably because it's out of passion, because it is a difficult field, not just to get in, but it can be very difficult to learn at times, because InfoSec requires this idea of being at sort of a base level where you understand the technology, but then moving into this idea of sort of a mastery where you can abuse it. Because in order to actually hack something, you need to really understand what system is there in the first place so you can understand its flaws. Then we have this idea of punish in private, or just, not at all and then reward in public. The entire idea of, frustration with this learning and punishing people for things that they didn't necessarily know is archaic at best. And, there are situations where it works, but marrying that with the idea of gamification, there's really just so much more that you can do with that. And then rewarding public, that is something we'll go into in a later slide, but having this gamification system really lends itself very well to that reward system. And then security as a game of exposure. When I was first starting, there was this huge stigmata towards looking at write-ups. Everyone thinks that, I'm going to be cheating if I go look at a write-up. And we wanted to really reinforce, and this is something that you can see present in the TryHackMe Discord, it is okay to look at a write-up because you really, if you don't know something, it's very difficult to know what you don't know if you've never heard of it before. And that's really where this concept of exposure comes in. Security, you need to know a lot of different things to sort of a small level, where you have these juxtaposed ideas of breadth and depth. So breadth being how much you have to know, depth being how much of each topic do you need to know. And examining the proper proportions behind that really is how you start defining where the learning has to happen. So say, for example, again, returning that idea of Nmap, knowing a little bit of networking, knowing a little bit about how to get that tool installed, knowing how to use Kali to some extent, or whatever operating system you install it on, but knowing how much of those that you need to know, so how much experience you need to have with Kali, that is where you can start seeing the challenge on the educational level, and really where there was a lot of room for improvement. And you can see as we go throughout these, where these gamification values really are starting to bleed in to infosec. And even moving into more specifically, let's break down how gamification works on TryHackMe, or at least some of the major points. So here we have this idea of gamification, first and foremost, in the interface. When you are hacking, it should feel like a game. You shouldn't be punished for not knowing something. You should be rewarded, and it should feel like fun. That's the real power behind gamification, is where you take something that is work and make it fun because it has a gamification factor to it. And you can see this happening with, for example, bug bounty systems where you can get a standing from it, or even more so, a lot of workplaces are slowly adopting this as a reward system. And then we have this idea of points more than anything. We wanted to introduce these points, but there's a mix of, where do points become pointless? Where is that value? And that's really where you start seeing this leaderboard come into play. Additionally, we had this idea of streaks. I believe that's something that Ben came up with, and it's just wonderful. It gives that impetus to keep coming back day after day, because having a big streak gets you rewards. And then you create this idea of a passive but powerful addiction throughout the entire site, where these factors start adding up very slowly, but they add up to be something really compelling and powerful. And then gamification in the challenges. So you can have themed rooms, and this gets into one of my favorite rooms on the website. First and foremost, when I'm going through and taking a look at the box queue, looking at rooms that we're looking to accept, I love this idea of being able to tell a story with whatever box I'm doing. So say, for example, the biohazard room, and I apologize if you've not done this room, I'm going to try to avoid spoilers, but biohazard is based off of Resident Evil Biohazard. I'm not really big on horror games, but I love that room. Resident Evil is known very well for its challenges, the little puzzles in the game. They're just very well done. And Descal, one of the community members that I don't know if he's still active anymore, I don't believe so, but he took that and translated it into an information security challenge with a slight Resident Evil twist on it. And it makes ultimately a really compelling journey that, some of the challenges are trivial, but you have these extra factors on top of solving InfoSec challenges into how these challenges fit together for what you're ultimately doing in the room. And it's really compelling. If you haven't done this room before now, I highly, highly recommend doing it, even just after this talk, or just go load it up right now. It's a ton of fun. And that's really where you start seeing that gamification factor come into full force, because make no mistake, you're doing work going through that room. You're learning how to do these things. Some of them are not very difficult. Some of them are. And that's still work that you're getting people to do on their own time because it's fun. And that's the magic of gamification. And then we have this idea of real world versus the game, especially on the site where, this is, you're learning skills to be able to take them out into the real world. You have to have this balance between gamified and also realistic. And that's something that has to be balanced. And that's something that there's a lot of power in striking that balance correctly. Moving on, we have this idea of rewarding the user. So on top of having gamification in the interface and telling a story with these boxes or vulnerable virtual machines, we have this idea of rewarding the user with things like Easter eggs. Now, if you haven't done it, there was day 24 for 2021's Advent of Cyber 2020, the most recent one as the time of this recording. Day 24 was a box created by myself, Mirland, Oracle, Spooky, and Varg of the TryHackMe community. And it is just riddled with Easter eggs. If you've done that box and you didn't find Easter eggs, go back and don't follow the instructions. Don't follow my instructions at all. There is so much more if you just don't pay attention to me, don't watch my write-up, or the video that I did for that. Just skip over that, explore things that are not where I tell you to go. And you can see this idea of poking around and exploring. It's sort of like the Zelda design of wandering around and you find secrets just for wandering. We would go through and a lot of times we'll hide some vouchers, like 1 month premium vouchers in TryHackMe boxes that release, and we just won't tell people because it's a ton of fun. A classic example of this, taking a step back to video games, is GoldenEye. GoldenEye is a classic game for the NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, and it was full of Easter eggs, full of cheat codes, full of things that you could explore, and it rewarded people for trying out new stuff. That's really cool idea. And then taking that and putting it in boxes, we have this idea of rewarding exploration and embracing advanced concepts in that some of the boxes that I design and that we want to look for on the site will have ways that you can just skip by stuff. You can skip steps if you know to do things or know how to do other things that make the boxes easier. There are a lot of ideas like that, and that's really cool. And that's something that, especially if you did a box differently than someone else, that's a fun conversation to have. That's exciting. And then we have probably the most important part of this, the community element. These are a little bit older screenshots at this point in time, but we have this idea of the leaderboard and the TryHackMe community behind everything. So the subreddit and then the Discord and the forum, you have a group of hackers that you can learn with. Additionally, you have this idea of certificates of completion. So you get these rewards for completing things. And that's very meaningful because you can show that off on places like Twitter and LinkedIn, and that furthers the community aspect. More than anything, when you're learning hacking, having that group of friends that you can sort of egg each other on, that is one of the best ways you can learn, and it's something that's incredibly powerful. If you don't have a group of friends to learn hacking with, I highly recommend introduce yourself to other people, start making friends, try to figure out who you can hack with because you will learn better. You will learn more, you will learn faster, you will have more fun playing with other people. And then taking a step forward, let's take a look at how this is going to go in the future. This is something this talk was previously designed for another conference as a keynote. This is something that was a little bit more focused on that, but I wanted to still talk about where the industry ultimately is going to go with this. So labs and levels, this is something we've really focused on at TryHackMe, and I know other sites have focused on this as well. But furthering networks, furthering this idea of multiple machines, and then sort of revisiting that exploration drive, this idea of freedom of choice, or you have a guided experience. There's a lot of progress that can be made there, and I think that that's really where the industry has a lot of room for growth. And then teaching more with less. So more tools available to the user, again, having that idea that if you have a virtual machine that people are in and they've already hacked in, even if they do something that doesn't necessarily matter, and I'll talk about this a little bit with Blue, you still have that space that you can teach, and I think that's something that we can grow a lot on the industry with. Taking a step back and using the example of Blue on TryHackMe, I had this idea when I created it that, hey, we've gained access to this machine, and while it's not necessary to privest because Eternal Blue gets you root on the system, going through and showing how you can use just like privest mechanisms within Metasploit, that's something that you have that space that you can teach with, and you can get a lot of value since you're already there. So it's an idea that I think that we can go a lot further with the industry. And then we have this idea of everyone is a hacker. I think that further more and more, this is something we've done an excellent job of, but we still have a ways to go, is being more accepting with our industry. And gamification is for everyone. And taking that and driving home the point of anyone can learn this, agnostic of, age, gender, if you have disabilities, I think that there's a lot that we can do with that. and then being human in everything. This is something that I think that the community overall has a lot of ways we could grow, and this is something that you could take a step back and get on a soapbox with. But there's a human behind that keyboard, at least until the robots take over, and really focusing on that, not just in the community aspect, but focusing on it from our educational aspect. We learn distinctly as humans. We have a lot of progress with that, and that's somewhere that I see the industry growing immensely. And again, the future of infosec training, I already talked about this quite a bit, but increased coverage for Blue Team, and this is something that we've had a lot of additions for, and keep posted for a potential event with this on TryHackMe. You didn't hear from me. Further training of Red Team. So again, these exams such as DFIR, advanced topics, DFIR being digital forensics and incident response. I think these advanced topics are really where we're going to see a lot of growth. And then redevelop trainings, putting feedback to good use. This is one of our favorite things to do on TryHackMe is, maybe a part of the room is just completely, it's very confusing. And it's not necessarily confusing to us, but that's a sign that maybe we need to go back and rewrite that, and maybe there needs to be a hint. So something that we can do a lot as industry. And then redefine learning experience. I'm going to glaze over this pretty quickly, but exploration of how we learn further than just the basic understanding. There is a Veritasium video that's not super old on this that I recommend checking out just because that entire idea of the different types of learning is very flawed, and it's something that we need to move past on an educational level. And then the expansion of modalities for our actual teaching. So further leaning into gamification, leaning into more experimental learning methods, and then really pushing this idea of asynchronous training, like with sites such as TryHackMe or other online training sites, pushing that further so that we can go further as an industry on the whole. Just some concluding thoughts to wrap this up. Again, gamification is the evolution of learning at its finest, and this is no different within InfoSec. As we embrace gamification, we can further learning and strengthen our industry on the whole. And hopefully throughout the presentation, that has been something that has been clear as we explore just how much growth is possible. That being said, thank you for having me here at GrabCON. I am John. I go by Darkstar Online. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, but otherwise, thank you so much and have a great rest of your conference.
I hope you all are learning something new. Our next speaker is Mr. Rohit Sehgal, whose topic is Defender's Guide to Container Native Infra.
Hi everyone, I am Rohit, and today I want to talk about attackers and defenders guide to Docker and Kubernetes. I want to keep this presentation quite casual, so I want to start discussing around what are containers, what are Docker containers, and why do we need orchestration, which is Kubernetes on top of containers. Once we have basic understanding of orchestration, we'll talk about the basics of deployment as well, how Kubernetes is deployed, and what could be the possible configuration issues around Kubernetes cluster. Once we are done with it, we'll move into different kind of attacks which are possible in Kubernetes cluster environment and also in a Docker container environment. And at last, I will give you a very basic how we can implement simple controls to counter those kind of attacks which are possible in this environment. So yeah, let's get started. So yes, I am Rohit. I am a security ninja. I have close to 6 years of experience in the security field. I started as a developer in security team at Walmart, and since then I have been continuously evolving from software developer to junior pen tester, and then from pen tester to senior security engineer at Visa. And right now I'm working as a staff security engineer at Gojek, and Gojek has now merged with Tokopedia, so basically it's like GoTo now. I have 4 years of experience if you see my professional path, but I also have 2 years of like master's experience from IIT Kanpur. Yes. So let's get started to the discussion around this presentation. So let's get started with what are containers. And when I say containers, I will talk about specifically Docker containers. Okay, so Docker is basically a magical concept which can package application and its dependencies into a single unit called as containers. So basically, containers are nothing but the runtime configuration of a specific thing, and that thing is basically nothing but a application which is packaged along with its dependencies. And this why do like are gaining popularity? Because this is because container can help us scale our applications. So when I say scale, it means that through orchestration like Docker or Docker Compose, so through orchestration like Docker Compose and Kubernetes, they can make it OS independent, as we already mentioned, by packaging it. So basically, including all the dependencies inside that Docker container, you can actually take that container and run it anywhere. So making it OS independent. And it also tried to make it secure by isolating the entire application logic from the rest of the operating system and other applications which are running on the same operating system. So this is how container like takes your basic application and try to make it secure, OS independent, and scalable. But containers cannot scale on their own, so we'll have other technologies that we are going to discuss in coming slides. Yes, containers may sound similar to virtual machine, but they work differently than virtual machine. So in virtual machine, we have hardware, some sort of hardware isolation, not exactly hardware isolation, but host operating system, which is the operating system where your containers run, will try to create a virtual sort of abstraction, which will make guest OS believe that it is getting the proper share of the hardware. So let's say if you have two guest OS running in your host OS, then the guest OS would know as if they are getting the entire share of CPU and entire share of RAM, which is allocated by the host operating system. Although it is not directly possible, it's the responsibility of host operating system to give you that kind of virtualization. So VM are more of hardware isolation, whereas Docker containers are more of software kind of isolation. That's why this make Docker containers more scalable as compared to virtual machines, because every time you create a new virtual machine, you need to give specific hardware resources to that particular virtual machine. That is not the case with Docker, and we'll see why is that the case, like why Docker are like smarter, how they can create the similar effect but in a smarter way. Okay, so Docker containers, as I mentioned, is a software virtualization, but this software virtualization is achieved with help of Linux namespaces and control groups. And these kind of these namespaces helps you create an isolated environment. And let's see what sort of namespaces do we have in Linux. So Linux namespaces basically partition kernel resources, and there are 7 different namespaces that we have in Linux. One is mount. Mount creates the virtual file system partitioning. It's basically every kind of file system mounting or unmounting that happens is actually performed by mount file system, mount namespace. The second one is process, and process does the same virtualization with respect to process. IPC is for communication between the processes, and network is basically for network, user, UTS, and control groups. For us, if you see, if we keep all these namespaces in one bucket, then control group is the one that will fall outside that bucket. Because if you see, the control group is the one which actually allocates your hardware resources to namespace. So basically, that's why when I say software virtualization, it is actually namespaces with control groups. Although control group is also a namespace, but yes, control group is actually responsible for giving hardware, whereas other namespaces like mount, process, IPC, and etc., they are actually creating an environment for virtual, I would say, virtual resource allocation. So these things build your Docker container, and this Docker container gets this isolation or virtualization power from these 7 different namespaces, and this is how container or Docker container works specifically. I don't want to get into more details about how this bifurcation and stuff happens with respect to these namespaces, because this will go out of the context for this presentation. So let's continue with this knowledge only, and I think this is sufficient for us to understand the issues around containers. We will also see how Docker creates container environment with help of container engine. But yeah, that we'll see in upcoming slides. The next thing I want to talk about is like quick process, like quick walkthrough about what Docker containers are. So basically, you can install Docker container, and the installation is very much specific to your operating system. So I'll skip that part. The second thing is you can test your container installation with the help of this command, which is docker and hello world. Docker is actually the Docker client which is used to talk to Docker engine. Yes, Docker works on client server model. So basically, when you run a command Docker, it will talk to your Docker engine, which is nothing but the server of, or you can call it as a brain of your Docker environment. And run is actually telling the Docker to run a image which is known as hello world. Now, what is this image? Image is nothing but the pre-existing set of instruction which is telling what Docker engine should do. And you can keep your images in private repositories or in public repository. The public repository is nothing but known as Docker Hub. So you can think of it as like a repository where you can keep your images, make it available to public so that people can use it and as the way they want. Yes, to push images in Docker Hub, you would need credentials, so you need to log in first. So Docker login command can be used for that. The next thing is Docker file. So basically, you build an image from a Docker file. So Docker file is the file where you actually write instructions, and Docker image is the outcome of that file. So how you can build that particular Docker file from build that particular Docker image from Docker file. This is the command. So basically, Docker build -t is the tag name, and dot is for the current directory. So basically, it will pick the Docker file from current directory and build an image with the name which is mentioned here. And once you have the image built, you can actually check the list of all the images which are there in your system. You can use Docker images to check that. And once you have this image created, you can actually push that image to Docker Hub using this command, which is docker push, and then tag of that particular Docker image. So this is how in nutshell Docker works. I know this was very basic, but for us, we don't want to spend more time around understanding what containers are. Rather, we want to understand what are the different kind of attacks and defense strategies around containers. That's why I'm just keeping it a very brief level. So let's go ahead. The next question that might come into your mind is like, why aren't Docker containers sufficient? As in, they have everything, they have this kind of virtualization, but why aren't they sufficient? And if you remember in the second slide only, I mentioned that Docker needs something for scale, right? So why is that the case? Why Docker isn't sufficient in itself? So let's see a simple scenario for it. So let's say you have a node or a compute, and in that node or a compute, you have 3 instances of container running. Basically, 3 different applications running as independent like virtual environment as Docker containers. Now, what will happen if this particular node goes down? As in, if this particular node goes down, there is no way for us to access those applications. Meaning that these applications which are hosted inside this node will go down. And even if we have used restart is equal to always flag while running the Docker, this will only work if the same node comes up. But this will not happen in case if this node never comes up, these applications will never be bring back to life. So this is the issue with Docker. This is the very basic issue with Docker. So this happens because Docker was not designed to handle this kind of situation, and we needed something on top of it which we can help. So this is one of the issues. The second issue was load balancing and creating replicas for your application. Now, if you know, we deal with the world where your load is quite high, so we need to have the replicas of the application for effective throughput, right? Because let's say if the request incoming request increases, we need our application to be like quite responsive in that. So if you see, I cannot spin up even if I spin up the replicas of the same container, the logic of load balancing these kind of containers for a single request will actually be written by myself. Let's say if I want to write a replica of a specific application, this logic will have to be taken care by my application logic only, and this was really cumbersome job. Um, so the load balancing and replica abstraction on top of applications was not existing in the Docker environment. This is one of the issues. And the third one I want to talk about here is the upgrades with downtime. Let's say you are running a specific version of Nginx web server in one of the Docker containers. Now, how can you move to the latest version providing there is no downtime? So rolling upgrades is a problem with containers, and also containers do not effectively work with the distributed resources. The distributed resources, when I say, could be storage, could be secrets, could be services, and stuff like that. So this was you can think of these things as couple of issues around why Docker containers are insufficient. That's why we need an orchestrator on top of containers to deal with these kind of scenarios. And we have like good number of orchestration available in market. Docker Swarm is one of those. Kubernetes is one of those. OpenShift, Nomad Server, Rancher, and Mesos. These are really like existing solutions for orchestration on top of it. Like Docker Swarm is for Docker containers. Kubernetes is also for Docker containers. These all are for Docker containers, but they work with other resources as well. Let's say OpenShift work with virtual machines as well. So this was like we needed orchestration. We had orchestration to deal with the issues which I mentioned in the previous slide. But out of these orchestration, Kubernetes was like getting popularity because it is completely open source, and it has proven, like it has well tested its capabilities. It has proven its capabilities like in organization. So if you see, like Kubernetes is really adapted by the organization because it's open source, because it's very easy to maintain, manage, and stuff like that. So yeah, Kubernetes got its attention, and Kubernetes is at times referred as K8s because of eight characters that comes between K and S. It's almost similar to why like we write international as I18N. So the same way we write Kubernetes as K8s as well. So what makes Kubernetes different from containers? So Kubernetes takes the concept of container and makes something known as a pod. So in Kubernetes, the fundamental unit is not a container, but a pod. Now, how pod is different from container? So pod is different from container in a way that a pod can run multiple containers in it. Although it is recommended that a pod should run only one container in it, but yes, pod can run multiple containers in it, and Kubernetes has taken this effectively, and that's what is the fundamental unit of the Kubernetes, not the container. So basically, in Kubernetes world, we see pods rather containers. Although these pods run only one containers in them, but yeah, we see these pods more, not more. Basically, we see these pods only in Kubernetes space. And what makes these pods special in the sense that all the containers which are running inside one pod can share all the resources which were there. So when I say resources, they are nothing but the namespaces that we mentioned. It could be network, storage, and other namespaces that we can think of. In Kubernetes world, this pod or any other thing is known as a resource. So basically you have resource, pod is one of the resource, and other resources could be pods, services, replica set, load balancer, deployment sets, etc. So basically in Kubernetes world, we have these many resources. This is not the full list. We have more resources as I mentioned here. But what you do is you basically take these resources, write a spec file for it, and that spec file is in YAML notation, and then you give that file to Kubernetes cluster to take care of the deployment. So basically, it's like you can think of this as infrastructure sort of code. So basically, you write your entire configuration about your infra. Not infra, I would say, but like you can think of it as the different components of your application, and then you write them in a specific spec file, give it to Kubernetes cluster, and that's the responsibility of Kubernetes cluster to maintain uptime, take care of load balancing, take care of replica set, rolling upgrades, and everything that I mentioned was the issue with the container. So that's why we need orchestration, and this is like Kubernetes. Then this is how Kubernetes deals with orchestration, and that too specific to containers. Next thing, I want to talk about the architecture of Kubernetes, and I want to talk about this with respect to the attack that we are going to see in coming slide, which is SSRF. And this knowledge is really required for us to understand how SSRF can be exploited in Kubernetes environment. So in Kubernetes, again, it's a master client model. Master is at times also known as control plane. So in Kubernetes, you have more than one master and you have more than one clients. Clients are also known as workloads. The master have one of the main important component, which is Kube API server. So this Kube API server is the heart, or I should say the brain of the entire Kubernetes cluster. Everything which is like the new pod has to be created, the new resource has to be created, it is actually performed by Kube API server only. So Kube API server receives requests from us, as in the developer or administrator of the Kubernetes cluster, and then takes necessary step to initiate communication with clients and stuff like that. We will see how that communication happens, but for now, let's see that there is something called as Kube API server, which is actually running on master node on port 6443 that deals with the interaction between the different components or the different resources in the Kubernetes cluster. The next one is Kube API Scheduler. Kube API Scheduler doesn't schedule anything, rather it will just give you where to schedule. Let's say if you have a pod to schedule, Kube API Scheduler, on basis of the algorithm that are written in there, it will tell you which client you have to pick to schedule that pod in that particular client. So it's the responsibility of Kube Scheduler to tell where you have to schedule a new resource or migrate a resource and stuff like that. The next one is Kube Controller Manager. Kube Controller Manager is again an important component of the master node that deals with, you can think of it as like the controller for different resources, which will tell how to do it, what are the criteria and stuff like that. Every information inside masternode is stored in a distributed database, which is etcd. Etcd stores which pod is scheduled where, which server is scheduled where, what's the DNS and stuff like that. So etcd is basically, you can think of it as the storage area of this master or entire Kubernetes cluster. Each Kubernetes client, if you can see here, has a service running with the name of kubelet. So kubelet is nothing but an entity that will receive requests from Kube API server. So this is what that connects master and client together. So kubelet is a service which connects master and client together. And there is one more service that runs on each client, that is kubeproxy. Kubeproxy is more of a proxy service which will help access your services which are running inside the container. When I say services, basically the applications which are running inside your clients. And then after that, you can have multiple masters in your cluster, and these masters will help you schedule resources. So let's say I want to fire a new pod inside this cluster. The process goes like this. I have a kubectl, which is Kubernetes command line client that I have running in my machine. That command line client will talk to Kube API server. And then Kube API server will talk to different sources which are there in master, which is like Kube Scheduler, Controller Manager, etcd, and stuff like that. Once it receives green signal from all these three different entities, it will go and check a specific client, let's say client 1 in our case. It will talk to kubelet of client 1 in our case, and then it will schedule a pod. And once the pod is successfully created, the green signal or OK signal is given back to the user, which is, let's say, the administrator of the cluster. So this is how this the entire scenario of Kubernetes cluster. This is how architecture of the Kubernetes is designed. The good thing to see here is that the pod can be running on different client, and each pod might need a storage, and these storages are not residing on the clients, because if, let's say, the two replicas of same pod are scheduled across the two different nodes, then keeping storage in one node doesn't make sense, right? That's why we have a central persistent storage in form of disk, and pod basically access these disks and independently. So again, that is like the topic, that is a different topic in itself, how this access storage and works. So I'll just skip it for here, but you can think of it as a non-central distributed storage where each pod can access independently. And this is the architecture of the Kubernetes cluster, but this architecture can be deployed in an infra, and that infra can be physical, like you have bare metals talking to each other. You have virtual systems like virtual machines, which I have set up for my case, which I'll use to show the demonstration. Then you can have the private cluster inside the cloud. You can have public cluster inside the cloud, and you can have hybrid cluster inside the cloud only. So these are the different underlying infra. When I talk about the same clusters, the same cluster or the same architecture can be deployed in these kind of underlying infrastructures. Cool. The next thing that I want to talk about is the Kubernetes cluster deployment strategy. So Kubernetes can be deployed as a managed entity or as unmanaged entity. When I say unmanaged entity, as in it means that you have like deployed master using kube ADM in it, and you have deployed client using kube ADM join. So basically, you have to deal with the deployment of master and client, and you only are responsible for like components management inside this, RBAC implementation, disk configuration, and stuff like that. And the issues arises with this is like if you create the cluster by your own, RBAC implementation can be problematic. You might not be able to configure it properly, or you can have looser disk configuration. When I say disk, it's like the storage, which I mentioned in the previous slide, that the storage is actually distributed. So those kind of configuration can be problem with unmanaged cluster. That's why it's always preferred to have the managed cluster. And when I say managed cluster, you have offerings from different kind of cloud providers. So Google provides ZKE, Azure provide AKS, and Amazon provide EKS, which is Elastic Kubernetes Service. And for this presentation, I want to talk about one which I have worked with, which is Google Kubernetes Engine. So Google Kubernetes Engine offer you different kind of flexibilities. This could be privately accessible or publicly accessible. I want to talk about these kind of deployments now because this will give you an overview why you should prefer a private deployment as compared to the public deployment with respect to GKE. So let's talk about publicly accessible GKE first. So we have seen this is our infrastructure for, this is our architecture for Kubernetes, Kubernetes control plane and client nodes. What happens in publicly accessible GKE is that you have two different VPCs. So one is your project VPC, which is having your client nodes, and one is Google managed VPC, which is having your control plane. So basically, if you see, there are two different VPCs which are talking to each other in publicly accessible GKE. The one is Google managed. You cannot go inside that at all. So basically, you don't have access to control plane of Google managed VPC. This is true with publicly and privately accessible cluster as well. So Google managed VPC, it's managed by Google as the name suggests. But what we can do is we can actually connect to control plane of VPC through an entity called as load balancer. So basically in publicly accessible GKE, you have control plane endpoints accessible through a load balancer, and that load balancer is facing public internet. So when I want to fire a command from my system, I'll just make a call to Google managed load balancer, and that will help me spin up the pod in the way it's like normal scheduling. So I don't talk to Kube API server directly, I talk to managed LB, and that LB talks to Kube API server and performs this deployment of a specific resource. But there is an issue, and that issue is more towards insider threat. So let's say you access, first of all, I want to tell you that once you access this resource access is done through cluster configuration, which comes with GKE. So let's say in your machine, you have to configure this cluster. That is almost similar to just running a single command. That command will fetch load balancer configuration, basically the IP address and stuff like that, the credentials to connect to this API server. So basically this endpoint, although is exposed to public, but it is not directly accessible by anyone because it is protected. So you need authentication and authorization on top of it. And that is done using cluster configuration, which is stored inside this machine. But let's say someone, So let's say that someone copies that cluster configuration from your machine to some other machine. And as you know, this is a good possibility of an insider threat, considering that it's a remote environment that all of us are working from. Insider threat is actually serious in these cases more. So basically, let's say, ignore how, but let's say someone copy that cluster configuration from your machine to someone else's machine. Now, if they have copied that cluster configuration, now they will also have, or they can also have the similar access what you had with the entire Kubernetes cluster. So publicly accessible cluster have this kind of issue, which is if someone copies the cluster configuration in your system to their system, then they can access basically everything inside that cluster. So it's recommended to have privately accessible GKE. And how this privately accessible GKE works is that it creates a jump box environment and you make Google managed VPC receive connection from only that jump box. And that jump box resides inside your project VPC. And how you can connect to your jump box is like VPN tunnel. So we all connect to our VPCs through VPN tunnel, and only using that tunnel we can access the private GKE, right? So if you see this way, let's say if an employee is like moved to some other like employee leaves the organization, the access for the VPN will also go. So in private cluster, we can actually save us from these kind of scenarios. So private clusters are comparatively secure than public cluster in a managed and cluster environment. So that's why it's recommended to have private cluster as compared to public clusters. Okay, so now we have good understanding of what Kubernetes cluster is, how the cluster is deployed, what is the underlying infra, public and private deployment configuration. I want to talk specifically about XSRF in Kubernetes. So before talking about SSR in Kubernetes, let's talk about a scenario, how the different services inside Kubernetes works. So if you see, all the services which I have mentioned, master node and client node, are nothing but running as pods. So these pods have some sort of a port exposed through Kubernetes services, and any pod inside any node in Kubernetes cluster can access each other. So that's how Kubernetes is designed. So Kubernetes gives you guideline that the pod should be reachable, and this concept is known as service mesh. So service mesh says that, let's say if you have an application running inside one pod, that application should be able to access any other application running inside any pod, and this could be in any namespace. So when I say namespace now, it's nothing but the namespace resource of the Kubernetes, not the Linux namespaces. So this gives us more flexibility in terms of, let's say if I'm an attacker, so it gives me more flexibility in terms of exploiting it. So let's say there is a vulnerable SSRF vulnerable application, and as an attacker I configure it to access Kube API server. So this is possible just because of service mesh. Although it's not very trivial, but yeah, that is possible. If there is a SSRF vulnerable application, that vulnerable application can access any other resource inside this Kubernetes cluster. And when I say any other resource, it's like almost any resource that you can think of which is running inside that cluster. And that happens because in service mesh, we have something called as core DNS namespace, and that core DNS name server. That core DNS name server gives a name to specific service. We will also see what this name is, but yeah, that is given to all the services running inside Kubernetes cluster. Before moving ahead, I want to show you a quick demonstration around this. And for showing the demonstration of SSRF, I am actually using this Kubernetes goat, which is designed by Madhu. It's really nice application to test. It basically is a vulnerable application to learn more about different kind of issues in Kubernetes cluster. So I have the same, like the internal proxy running in my cluster, basically in my cluster deployment, and that is nothing but an internal API proxy. So you can think of it as a vulnerable SSRF application. So if this application is vulnerable to SSRF, what I can use is I can actually call some other service through this domain name. So let's understand what this domain name is. So this is the name of the service. If you see, I have a Nginx service running in my Kubernetes cluster in default namespace and on port 8080. So what I'll try to do is from this service 1234 service, I'll try to hit this Nginx namespace service. Now, how this can be done? This can be done through the Kubernetes name domain names. And how does Kubernetes domain name works? The first entity is nothing but the name of the service, which is Nginx. The second one is the name of the namespace in which it is running in. So by default, all the services which you query like this runs on the default namespace. So this Nginx service is running in the default namespace. The next is the name of the resource, which is SVC, which is service. And cluster.local is nothing but the top level domain. You can think of cluster.local as a TLD for the entire cluster. So basically with this domain name configuration, you can access the entire cluster entire cluster service. And since my service runs on port 80, I'm using port 8080 to get the service. And let's see if I'm able to try it, like if I can hit this service or not. So putting the get method and trying to make the service request. And as soon as I make the service request, you can see this as you can actually access the service, basically the Nginx service, from this internal API proxy. And yeah, so that's one of the issues with this kind of environment, which is basically your SSRF. So in case if your application becomes vulnerable to SSRF, then this application exposes gates for all the different application or services running inside the same cluster, and this happens because of issues like the service mesh architecture that I've just mentioned. The next thing that I want to talk, the next attack that I want to discuss in Kubernetes environment, not Kubernetes environment, but in container environment, is DIND, the kind of DIND exploitation which is possible. So to understand DIND is basically nothing but a Docker inside Docker. You want to run a Docker inside a Docker container. So DIND is for that. And how you can run. So why do we need DIND first? So DIND is actually very frequently used in GitLab or GitHub pipelines, where you want to build a Docker container and you want to build a Docker container inside Docker itself. So that's why DIND is used. Now, how DIND is severe? To understand that, we need to understand how Docker command works. So as I mentioned in my previous slide, that Docker command works with client server architecture. And the command that you have here is nothing but a client. That client talks to a socket which is running inside your host machine. That socket usually runs at var run docker.sock location, but it can run in different locations as well. So this client talks to this Docker socket, and this Docker socket talks to Docker engine, which I mentioned earlier as well, that this is the brain of the Docker containers. So this Docker engine is responsible for then spinning up a Docker container, as it is mentioned here. So when you run docker run alpine, this will talk to Docker socket will talk to Docker engine, and Docker engine will run a container which is mentioned here, which is nothing but the alpine container. So this is the normal scenario, not DIND scenario. The DIND scenario happens when you mount this Docker socket inside this application. Now, why do we need to mount Docker socket? Because Docker containers, as I mentioned earlier as well, that Docker containers works on Linux namespaces. When you already bifurcate those namespaces and create the container out of it, you don't have those namespaces again visible inside your container. So what you do is, to give the similar functionality of namespace bifurcation, we mount this Docker socket inside the container. So while running the container, we mount this Docker socket inside the same location inside this running container. And this goes like this. And now once you have this Docker socket, the same Docker socket available inside the container, the next thing that you need inside the container is Docker command. So once you have this Docker command available inside the same container, that the same Docker command can talk to host Docker socket and basically talking to your Docker engine. So this is how it goes. This is okay because usually you don't have Docker client running inside your Docker. And basically you see most of the GitLab pipelines that you build do not contain this kind of application inside. But the issues comes into picture when you have a vulnerable application running inside your container, and that vulnerable application is like having Docker install in it, and then it's talking to the Docker socket. And this is a very like basic example of supply chain attacks. So, but what now can happen is this Docker, the Docker container, which is this application, since it has access to this socket, this can talk to the socket which is in the host, and that can talk to Docker containers, and that will get access to another containers which are running inside your host operating system. So you can see that if you are using DINT, make sure that application is well tested before using DINT, because once application gets vulnerable, that the DINT kind of scenario makes it difficult. Like in DINT kind of exploitation, it gives access to the host container as well. So yeah, it's not recommended. That's, as I mentioned, that it is very like frequent in case of supply chain attacks if this image is not trusted. So always when you are using this Docker socket mounting, always make sure that you have like well trusted image that you are putting in. So yeah, that's what DINT is. Again, I will use this particular application, which is running the Kubernetes Goat application, to tell you how severe DINT can be. So you can think of this application as an application which is vulnerable to command injection. So let's say if this is vulnerable to command injection, I will just use mount command to see if the Docker is like Docker socket is mounted or not. So I'm just using this mount, and let me observe if there is a Docker socket. Yes. So if you can see, Docker socket is mounted on custom docker.sock. So basically, yes, we have a Docker socket mounted. So there is a good possibility for DINT exploitation. And now this application is vulnerable to SSRF. Let's try to, now this application is vulnerable to command injection, and let's try to exploit this and take this to next level. So next thing that I mentioned for DINT is the presence of the Docker command inside it. So to get the Docker command, what I'll try to do is now I'll try to download the Docker command for this container. So let's try to do this. It will perform the download operation, and this might take a couple of minutes based on my network bandwidth. So let's try to submit it. And as I mentioned, it will take some time because it's actually downloading uh, Docker right now from like downloader.docker.com. And once it downloads the Docker, I'll try to unzip it because it's a tar.zz notation, format, and then we'll try to unzip it as well. So it will take some time. Okay, so now my Docker should be downloaded. So what I'll try to do is I'll just try to check if the Docker is downloaded with ls-i temp command. And yes, I can see one tar.gz file created. Basically, the Docker is now downloaded. Now, next thing is to basically perform the extraction. For extraction, I'll use the tar command utility to extract it. So let's run it again. And again, based on the computing power of the container, it will take some time for unzipping as well. Based on the file size, this can take some time. So it's still running. So yeah, that extraction is complete. If you can see the output also, the extraction is complete now. The next thing that I have to do is basically run the Docker utility. So this is how I'll run. So basically, since my Docker command is available inside temp, so I'm using temp Docker, like the command like this, and I'm using this -h for basically connecting to the socket that was present, that I showed in case of mount also. So I'm using this command now to get the list of all containers which are running inside host. So again, note the beauty here that this will not list the container which are running inside the container, which is not possible actually. So it will give you the list of the containers which are running inside your host container, apart from the current one as well. So if I run this, I should be able to get some output. And yes, if you can see, I got the list of all the containers which are running inside this, and this will should match the output of this. So okay. So yeah, if you can see, this should match the output, this one. Yeah, so this is how you can exploit DIND, basically Docker inside Docker. If you have command injection vulnerability, or if you have untrusted image, which is there, you run inside that mounted with DIND. So yeah, that's the issue with Docker inside Docker. That's why it's not recommended to use DIND unless you trust an image completely, or you have well tested that image that this image cannot be exploited against command injection vulnerabilities. The next thing that I want to talk about is, like, it's a short thing, that don't trust Kubernetes secrets because they aren't secrets at all. So if you create a secret with Kubernetes command, which is kubectl create secret generic my secret from literal foo equal to par, then uh, basically this is the resource name, this is the name of the secret, this is create a secret from this literal, and this literal name, and this is the secret value, which is the bar. This entire secret is not stored as some sort of encrypted data, rather it is encoded data, and that encoding is basically that encoding is nothing but a base 64 encoding. And base 64 encoding, we all know that it's not safe to keep your secret information. Let me try to check if we have any secret running inside a secret resource inside our cluster. So yes, there is a secret, which is my secret. So let me try to do it. Okay, perfect. So what I'll try to do, I'll just try to describe it. Okay, so yeah, since I can describe it, I will just describe it with the YAML notation and see the difference now. While describing, you won't get any output. You're just getting that data is of 3 byte. But if I just describe it with -o YAML, okay, let me try with this. Okay, yeah. So if I just get that secret with the -o YAML flag, you will see the value of the secret, which is YMF this. And if I just dump the response, so you can see that if I just try to decode it, I'll get the plain text of that secret as well. So what I want to say here is that Kubernetes secrets aren't secrets. So if you have to store some sort of secret information inside Kubernetes cluster, it's always recommended to have that encrypted. And once you encrypt it, store it inside that secret, and you should have application logic to perform that decryption, because anyone who have access to that cluster can access your resources unless you have RBAC properly implemented. Now, since I mentioned RBAC, let's talk about what RBAC is. RBAC says that you have a couple of actors inside your application, inside your cluster. These actors are nothing but users or groups or some sort of service accounts, and you provide only the access which is needed by them. So when I say access, the access could be list, create, get, fetch, delete, and stuff like that, which we can also term as actions. And what we want is, we basically want the access to be restricted enough in the way that these people only get limited access to limited resources. What could be the resources? These are the Kubernetes resources, as we already know. So RBAC is basically implementing specific policy which restricts the access of other users across cluster. So let's say if I just want to give group to list services, then I'll create a policy inside the Kubernetes cluster. In the lieu of time, I will just skip how we can create policies, but I just want to bring one point here that let's say if you have a service account access for Kubernetes cluster for a specific pod. So yeah, this is possible. You can create a service account and you can give that service account access to the entire Kubernetes cluster using service account credentials. This is currently out of scope for this presentation, but I would like to talk about this as a scenario. Now, what will happen is once you give the access to that service account and that service account is available inside any pod, then basically this means that the pod will get access to the entire cluster only. So always make sure if you are giving any service account access, that access should be restricted. By default, Kubernetes will give all the access to service account if you provide it. So by default, it's like all allow. So make sure you have RBAC implemented properly to deal with this kind of scenario. So yeah, I only had these things to cover today. I hope you really liked it. The kind of presentation I made, I hope you liked it. It was fun delivering this presentation for me. I would definitely suggest you try Kubernetes Goat by Madhu. Definitely you will get to know about other scenarios as well. I've just talked about 2 different scenarios, but yeah, if you can download that, or there is a hosted version of Kubernetes Goat as well, you can use that to see how you can learn about Kubernetes attacks in Kubernetes cluster. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Special thanks to Madhu and CyberGrabs for giving me this opportunity, and for Madhu for building this Kubernetes Goat, which I've used for this presentation. If you have liked the mode of the presentation, I have tried to make it more casual in a zine format. Yes, and I write a lot of other zines as well. You can find those zines at securityzines.com. So yeah, I'm hopeful that you like this presentation. Catch you later. Thank you.
So this was the last talk for the day. Hope you all learned something great. Please tell us in the comments how what you liked, what you can also ask questions, and don't forget to like the stream. And we would be coming with more talks tomorrow. So stay tuned, and also don't forget to subscribe.
you